Chapter 438. Only a few horsemen like Salas who were skilled in horsemanship were able to dodge the fatal blow and fight back. The cavalrymen's charge took down a lot of orcs, but they were immediately replaced by new warriors. The orcs lined up neatly in 3 rows and began to advance towards the Alliance cavalry, forcing them to retreat. Step by step, they forced them towards the lake. Although these orcs only had 3 thin layers, the quality of their individual soldiers was enough to crush the terrifying foundation of the Alliance cavalry. Even if it was just 3 rows, the Alliance cavalry would not be able to break through it. The rear began to stabilize, and the Alliance infantry was also fiercely attacked by the orcs from the center. For a moment, it was as if they were in a quagmire. Once they achieved their goal, half of the remaining orc soldiers continued to attack the city. They crossed the ice crystal forest and attacked the city wall fiercely. Soon they used up the stones, boiling oil, sand, and other things that could be used for defense. Now the orcs could safely continue to climb the city wall. The orcs climbed over the city wall with evil smiles and tried to climb as much as possible. Most of the orcs were pierced or shot down by the elven rangers before they could climb up the city wall. But some still managed to climb up and began to attack the guards. Arthas never thought that the orcs' ant-like siege was so terrifying. They had clearly extinguished the first wave of attacks not long ago. But more orcs surged over. The corpses of the orcs piled up and provided some cover for the orcs as they climbed the wall. They stepped on the corpses of their companions, and even used them as shields to resist the continuous rain of arrows and magic attacks that fell from time to time. The orcs' attacks were terrifying. Usually, as long as one orc climbed up the city wall, it would cost the lives of 5 to 6 Lordaeran soldiers to kill it. The defense of the city became precarious again. "We can't go on like this," Arthas shouted nervously to Duque. "Commander, Lordaeran will collapse first in the afternoon. We need reinforcements." Duque smiled. He touched Arthas's blood-stained helmet like a senior. "Your Highness, although I am not much older than you, in terms of military affairs, I am your senior." For some reason, Duque's smile gave the impression that Duque was proud of himself. He said in an extremely pretentious manner, "A true king or commander never defeats his enemies on the battlefield." "What?" Arthas was stunned. "A true commander will gather all the cards needed for victory before the battle begins. The so-called battle is often just a formality." Ah! At this moment, Duque's body was filled with an unparalleled aura. The mysterious and confident aura that lingered around him made everyone around him feel that as long as Duque pointed his finger, even if there were thousands of tribes, even if it was a cruel army that had destroyed several countries and was known as the nightmare of the human world, they would be reduced to ashes in an instant. Arthas was momentarily stunned. Hadgeron Brightwing and Theron, the 2 newly promoted ranger generals, froze on the spot. Beside Duque, Aurelia and Sasha's breathing quickened. Everyone stared at Duque's actions. They saw him proudly raise his left index finger and point it towards the northeast horizon. Following the direction of Duque's finger, a huge flag appeared. Rows of silver-helmeted and armored infantrymen walked out of the horizon. Behind them was the sun, making them look like an army that had walked out of the Age of Legends. The raised spears were like a forest, the tips of the spears reflecting the dazzling sunlight. For some reason, every soldier thought of the era when humans were united under a single flag for the first time in history. It awakened a distant legend that had been passed down from their ancestors for more than 2,800 years. That was an era when all human clans fought side by side. That was a glorious and resplendent era, where victory was the end of every battle. That one answer seemed to be branded in the soul, branded in everyone's genes. What was that answer? The Arathor Empire. The greatest human empire. At this moment on this battlefield, there was an even greater organization, the Lordaeran Alliance. 1, 2 dozens, hundreds of flags suddenly appeared on the horizon, fluttering in the wind. From the looks of it, there were more than 100,000 of them. The soldiers began to pick up speed, jogging on the battlefield. They held their heads high, their spears raised in rows. A silver-white wave appeared on the battlefield. They were clearly infantrymen, but they gave off a terrifying aura as if there were tens of thousands of galloping horses. These warriors all had distinct human facial features. Everyone looked at them from afar, but because of the sunlight, their faces were covered in a layer of golden light. Their faces became blurry, and the weapons in their hands became dazzling. Every face became deified. They seemed to have become an army of heroic spirits that had walked out from the distant past to once again fight for humanity. It's our people. It's our brothers from the Griffin Legion. Reinforcements are here. Long live the Alliance. Every soldier suddenly exploded with greater strength and momentum. The aura that had been suppressed by the Horde rose once again, suppressing the Horde. The redness on Orgrim's face faded. He knew that he had to make a decision. They were at a disadvantage, and the Alliance was attacking them from both sides. If he had enough time, he might have been able to surround them and attack the reinforcements. He could have taken out one or two of the Alliance's divisions first. But now the Horde was the one being surrounded. No matter how strong Orgrim's elites were, they only had a little more than 30,000 men. Now that the Alliance's troops had exceeded the Horde's limit, if they continued fighting, they might collapse. At that moment, Zulud brought even worse news to Orgrim. Great Chief, there are many warships on the lake in the south, flying the Dalajan and Gilnea's flags. They are less than half a day away from us. I miscalculated. Orgrim's mouth was full of bitterness. Originally, Orgrim dared to attack Lordaeron because he wanted to make use of the time difference. He wanted to take down Lordaeron before the main force returned. In Orgrim's plan, the Lordaeron army should return first, followed by Grom's 100,000 soldiers. The allied forces of Dalaran and Gilneas, who were further south, should be the last to arrive. But now, the Alliance used their original advantage on Lordaeron Lake to mobilize ships to send reinforcements to Lordaeron. If that was the case, the troops in Lordaeron would exceed 200,000 in a day. Even with Grom's troops, they still wouldn't be able to take them down. After thinking for a while, Orgrim finally shouted out the most bitter word he could think of. Retreat. Chapter 439. Before the arrival of the Allied army from the northeast, the tribe retreated like the ebb tide of the sea. They even avoided the Alliance infantrymen who had circled to the rear of the tribe, and were nailed there like a mainstay. At this moment, Dooku only lacked a feather fan and a sage-like robe. Then he could go and pretend to be a pig. The smile on his face made him look like he was full of confidence. Even though he was mobilizing troops that he already knew, it was as if he was in control of a magic box that could create an endless army of thousands of men and horses. He was always able to mobilize the most suitable troops at the most crucial time. Orgrim's fierce surprise attack turned into a magnificent ambush under Dooku's command. Just now, even the top of Lordaeron's walls could see the Dalajan and Lordaeron speedboats rushing over from the direction of Lordaeron Lake. Arthas was first pleasantly surprised to find that his hometown and his city had been saved. Then he immediately thought of something. If the Dalajan and Gilneas troops all come here, then what if the tribes of the Silverpine Forest attack south? That's right. Then what? It was not just Arthas. Several Alliance generals wanted to know the answer to this question. In fact, Dooku really wanted to teach Arthas. The one riding the white horse is not necessarily a prince, it can also be Xuanzang. The one who is a paladin can also become a demon king. But in order not to reveal the secrets of the heavens, Dooku pointed to the Alliance's speedboats on the calm lake in the south and teased Arthas. Your Highness, ships flying the Alliance flag are not all Alliance warships. Even if it was a warship, it did not mean that it only carried soldiers. The tribes will only see the Alliance's reinforcements coming, but they will never know that only ships, food and sailors are coming. Be it Arthas or the other generals of the Alliance, all of them were visibly moved. Dooku pointed to the huge formation of troops in the northeast. 100,000 troops are not equal to 100,000 elites. The true elites were only the few square formations at the front. The ones behind are just farmers who have been trained for less than 3 weeks. That's right, Dooku hadn't conjured the magic lamp of the army. He'd only placed the Griffin Legion in front of him for show. Behind them were the farmers provided by the local nobles of the Rotterdam Kingdom. However, after a period of training, they were at least more or less presentable when marching. When it came to real swords and spears, these guys who had never experienced blood and fire, no matter how bright their armor was, were still cowardly farmers deep down. The young Earthies was astonished. Is that even possible? Why not? Duque combed his sweaty hair. Didn't I mobilize so many troops to save Lordaeron? As long as we can defend today, when your father's army arrives, it will be the time for our alliance to encircle and annihilate the 2 orc armies that have penetrated deep into the alliance's hinterland. Earthie's eyes lit up. Duque's well-placed commands, his realistic disguises, and the military arrangements that had fooled even his own people. Duque's method of using his troops was an eye-opener for Earthies. It showed him what it meant to be a commander. The scenes that Earthies had experienced today were like images that had been imprinted on his soul. They had opened doors to a wider world for him, and he felt that he had benefited greatly. Suddenly, Earthies had an impulse. He strode forward and lowered his noble head to Duque. Lord Marcus, can I become your disciple and learn the art of war? Be it Duque or the others, everyone was stunned. The master of the prince of the strongest country on the continent. It sounded so noble. Unfortunately, when he thought of Earthies who had killed his own father and teacher, Duque felt disgusted, as though he had swallowed a fly alive. Duque didn't reply. He turned his gaze to the distance outside the east gate. There were countless orc corpses, as well as the bodies of more than 2,000 civilians lying there quietly. Duque's pupils shrank. He remembered that Lilith had told him about Earthies' order to close the gates. He was not a saint, and he didn't have the ability to save every civilian on the continent. In Duque's eyes, there was no such thing as saving 300,000 people, or abandoning 3,000 people. If he had known about the enemy's attack in advance like Earthies, he would have arranged for the civilians to take refuge more safely, instead of waiting for the disaster to befall them before deciding whether to abandon them or not. Before his transmigration, Duque had often heard of an old saying, "Don't do evil because it's small." In history, Earthies had started to fall precisely because he had massacred the citizens of Stratholme, who were about to become zombies, for the sake of the bigger picture. Duque had once wondered if Earthies would be different in this life. After all, Earthies was still a teenager, a relatively naive prince. Duque suddenly realized that personality really determined fate. The scene of abandoning 3,000 civilians had nothing to do with the original history, but Earthies still made a similar decision. Too ruthless. The experience of Earthies in history might be worthy of sympathy, but this guy was clearly the template of an ambitious and ruthless person. At this thought, Duque made up his mind. He pointed outside the east gate. A commander can be said to have to make the decision of who to let die at every moment. But the original intention of a commander is to protect the country and the people. And the soldiers who carry out the commander's orders are also willing to give up everything they have. I think your highness should first learn the principles of life and the way of the Holy Light from the Archbishop of Holy Light, before learning the way of a commander. After saying that, Duque left without looking back, leaving the generals of Rotterdam and Earthies, who looked as if he had been struck by lightning, in a daze. Of course, there was no need for Duque to clean up the battlefield and count the losses. Duque divided the army into 2 parts. One part was the 20,000 Stormwind infantrymen from Hillsbrad. After the battle, there were less than 15,000 of them left. Duke allowed all of them to enter Lordaeron City. The other group came from the northern sentry towers, with the Griffin Legion as the core. Together with the remaining 6,000 cavalry, they set up camp in the north of Lordaeron City, forming a triangle with Lordaeron City. The main purpose was to prevent Orgrim's main force from joining forces with Grom Hellroar's 100,000 orcs. On this day, Orgrim waited for the arrival of the ogres, while the Alliance quickly organized the city's defenses, and waited for the main force of Rotterdam to return. Finally, on the afternoon of the second day, the Alliance waited for Mograine, who had led his army back. When the famous Ashbringer saw the flag of Rotterdam on the city wall, this iron-like man immediately got off his horse and knelt on the ground, weeping and kissing the soil of Rotterdam. Chapter 440. Whose tears were flying, whose applause was ringing out. For the citizens of Lordaeron who claimed to be the best in the world, yesterday was definitely the most uneasy day. They used to think that war was so far away. The nobles sang and danced as usual. There were still hundreds of banquets and dances every month. Those great nobles would hold 1,000-person masquerade balls and provide hundreds of desserts at banquets. The peaceful thoughts of the nobles were greatly amplified. The citizens naturally enjoyed the peace and prosperity. Yesterday everything changed. The savage orcs broke through the layers of defense, crossed the mountains, and killed their way into the city. Even though most of the orcs were killed on the city walls, there were still a few who broke through the defense lines and started killing in the city. The strongest troops in Lordaeron were all stationed at the city walls. They had no choice but to hand over the task of killing the orcs to the city guards. These city guards, who had not undergone strict military training, were good enough to deal with gangsters, but they were not enough against the elites of the Blackrock clan. The number of orcs that broke into the city was 68. These 68 orcs had caused nearly 5,000 casualties. On average, each orc had killed 2 or more city guards, and caused more than 3 or more civilian casualties. Almost every family in the Eastern District had a funeral. The citizens of Lordaeron panicked. Even though there were more than 30,000 Alliance troops stationed at the back, many citizens and nobles woke up from nightmares. There was even a guy who shouted, "The orcs are coming," in his nightmare. This caused a chain reaction of panic, and caused more than 100 people to trample each other. It was only until Duque asked Arthas to activate the magical lights throughout the city, that the soldiers of Lordaeron sang the Lordaeron military song when they patrolled, that the citizens of Lordaeron felt a little more at ease. Just like that, the people of Lordaeron welcomed Lord Mograine's 8,000 cavalry the next day. Then 2 days later, they waited for the exhausted King Tyrrhenas to return with his main force. Even though they were forced to return, Tyrrhenas and his infantry were welcomed back like heroes. Almost every citizen gathered at the West Gate and welcomed the return of their army with the most passionate and sincere cheers. This was not a triumphant return worth bragging about. All the people wanted was a sense of security. Tyrrhenas was not in the mood to deal with the enthusiastic people. He hurried back to the palace. There, Deputy Commander Duque, General Lang, General Salas, General Kudrin, and Major General Haas had been waiting for a long time. Tyrrhenas did not put on any airs as the leader of the alliance. He followed the rules of the alliance and bowed to Duque, Lang, and the other kings. "Thank you very much, Deputy Commander-in-Chief, the 3 generals, and our allies for the rescue of Rotterdam City. Without your help, Lordaeron would be forever shamed." Tyrrhenas was serious. If it wasn't for Duque, he would be a stray dog now. "You're too polite, alliance leader. Didn't we establish this alliance to help each other today? If we don't work together, humans, dwarves, and elves will all be killed by the Horde. We may not even be qualified to be slaves." Duque was also very polite. The kings exchanged pleasantries as well. After the necessary formalities, Tyrrhenas did not hesitate. "All right, let me get straight to the point. Although I also think that 300,000 soldiers are needed to ensure that Rotterdam City will not be attacked by the Horde. The truth is that Rotterdam City does not have enough food to sustain 300,000 soldiers and 400,000 civilians for a long period of time. In the past, Rotterdam has always been providing food, weapons, and soldiers to the various countries. Now, it's Rotterdam's turn to need the support of the various countries." He spread out his palms, asking for money, rations, soldiers, everything. The leaders of the various countries felt bitter. The Wild Hammer dwarves almost never farmed. They lived a half-farming, half-herding life. Usually, they let their griffins fly around the mountains to catch food for themselves. Salas' earthy highlands had just been plowed by the Horde's locusts. If it wasn't for the fact that he didn't need cavalry to defend Torrentburg, he wouldn't have even sent out his soldiers. Alterax's home had just been raided less than a week ago, and there wasn't even a single blade of grass left. After all the twists and turns, Dalaran, which was relatively stable, was the wealthiest among all the countries. The next richest was the Stormwind Kingdom, which had been a disaster for more than a year. The summer harvest in the Hillsbrad Hills could not be hidden from anyone. Unfortunately, Stormwind had hundreds of thousands of mouths to feed. As soon as Tyrrhenas spoke, there was an awkward silence. Fortunately, everyone could remain silent except for Duque. The alliance had been fighting with the Horde for so long, and everyone had unknowingly gotten used to Duque being the real boss. The coordination was under Duque's control. The logistics and magical fields were under Duque's control. Even the command of most of the country's military, as well as the recruitment of new members, were under Duque's control. If Lothar wasn't busy dealing with the western battlefield, everyone would have almost forgotten that Lothar was the commander-in-chief. There were also troops from Rotterdam, Gilnes and the Daligen. Facing the gazes of the kings, Duque's expression was calm. Who said we're going to fight a long and drawn-out battle? Why can't we be more optimistic? Now is the best time for us to wipe out the main force of the Horde. As soon as he said that, all the big shots were stunned. Their thoughts really could not keep up with Duque's pace. Weren't the Horde invincible now? Didn't they see that no one could stop the Horde's advance? The flames of war had already spread across the entire northern continent. In the eyes of the kings, there was no safe place in the entire continent. From the southernmost earthy highlands to the northernmost Long Song forest, from the westernmost South Flow coast to the easternmost hinterlands, the Horde could be seen everywhere. Even though the Alliance had the upper hand on the western battlefield, they could not do anything to the remaining 100,000 Horde. Alterac had just been destroyed, and now Duque actually said that they could wipe out the main force of the Horde? If it was the Duque from a year ago, he would probably have to face endless doubts and even ridicule at this moment. But now Duque Salas laughed, Lang laughed and Kudrin laughed. Almost all the kings who were fighting at the eastern battlefield looked at Duque with kind eyes. Everyone was in a relaxed mood as they waited for Duque to say the answer that they had been waiting for a long time. To be honest, Terenas was very nervous just now. In order to obtain the position of the leader of the Alliance, the Rotterdam Kingdom had put in a lot of effort. However, he was not sure if his and his country's efforts would be reciprocated at this critical moment. Now, it seemed that the countries of the Alliance were not only reliable under Duque's coordination, but could also give him enough surprises. Duque smiled and opened a real-time image of a magic message. Latest news: Gul'dan sold Orgrim. Chapter 441. What? Gul'dan betrayed Orgrim? For most of the higher-ups in the Alliance, this was an unbelievable thing. It was as if someone had told them that Duque had betrayed Lothar. Their first reaction was that it was absurd and laughable. They were from the same faction, and had always worked closely together. How could they do such a thing? But the image in front of them forced them to believe it. This is an image sent by my subordinate Darniel, who risked his life. The first thing that came into view was a huge sea and a desolate beach. Most of them were confused by this beach, but King Salas Trollbane recognized this coast. Sea-gazing cliff? Yes. Duque gave an affirmative answer. Sea-gazing cliff was the hinterlands. The sea grew larger in everyone's field of vision. Looking into the distance, they could see some ships sailing near the shore. They were as ugly as garbage ships, and everyone recognized them as the transport ships of the Horde at a glance. The ships that brought the hated tribes from the other continent to this place. Although Kurtira's and the Bloodsail Navy under Stormwinds sank most of them to the bottom of the endless sea, the remaining half still brought destruction and death to the Alliance. A large group of orcs were either on the beach or in the shallow water, pulling the long oars with all their might to move the ships. An ogre sat in the middle of each ship, beating a drum that represented exertion. The orcs pulled hard with the rhythm, sending the ships into the sea. Seeing this, a general said, "Their chief is leading an army to attack Lordaeron, but they're in the hinterlands." At this point, the corners of everyone's mouths were already curving into thoughtful smiles. At this moment, a red dragon flew past. Everyone recognized it as the Red Dragon cavalry of the Horde. He rode the red dragon and circled in the air, seemingly observing the situation below. Following the direction of the red dragon, everyone saw a familiar figure on the first ship, the demigod warlock Gul'dan. Whether the Alliance was willing to admit it or not, he was a very dangerous fellow. At least he had the record of fighting Antonidas in Southshore, and both sides suffered heavy losses. After Duque repeatedly stressed that this guy was the culprit who had conspired with Medivh to open the door of darkness and send over 1,000,000 beastmen, Duque's expression changed. Gul'dan was even more dangerous than Great Chief Orgrim on the Alliance's list of enemies. At this moment, Duque waved his hand, and Alusia, who had been standing behind Duque, stepped forward. The Beastman Dragoon rider controlled his mount and flew to the front of the ship before shouting in Beastman language to Gul'dan. Alusia immediately translated. "What do you use these ships for?" The Dragoon rider continued to follow the ship with his mount while waving his free hand. Looking confused, the Warlock monarch raised his hands in confusion. The dragon cavalry let Long Fei get closer to the ship and roared a few more times. Alusia continued to translate. "Turn the ship around. The chief's main force is in Lordaeron, not on the other side of the sea." The dragon rider shouted again. Gul'dan was still gesturing that he could not hear. This time, the Beastman flew directly to the top of the ship, less than 30 meters away from the Warlock. Suddenly, Gul'dan's hand shot forward, and 2 green rays shot towards the dragon cavalry's chest, while the other shot towards the red dragon. Sharp pain exploded in both the Beastman and the red dragon. The world around the dragon cavalry turned black in an instant. It was a huge black ball of magical energy. Clearly, this ball was rapidly absorbing their lives. By the time the dragon cavalry fell from his saddle, he was already a dried corpse. The red dragon was not much better off, its huge body withering at a speed visible to the naked eye. But when it fell into the sea, it was suddenly caught by a huge net. Several huge twin-headed ogres fished up the struggling red dragon and killed it with a single blow. Then they skillfully dissected the red dragon's corpse on the deck. Clearly, they had done this kind of thing many times. The video ended here. Alusia obediently retreated behind Duque. Duque said, "This is a video from this morning. In fact, from the moment this army retreated from Kuel Salis, I had Kudrin's men follow them from afar." The brute Hammer King nodded. A confident smile appeared on Duque's face. "To the Horde, this is definitely a rebellion. Of course, we have not received any definite information on whether Gul'dan is rebelling or not. But we can be sure that in the upcoming battle around Lordaeron, the Horde will not receive any magical support. Yes. No warlocks. No terrifying twin-headed ogre mages. There are only a bunch of muscular bastards who only know how to wield axes and clubs. Haha. That's great. I don't like those guys anymore. Finally, I can kill to my heart's content." The slightly boorish Kudrin laughed loudly with the dwarf's unique loud voice. "If we can get rid of these 2 main forces of the Horde, Torrential Fortress will be saved." King Soras let out a long sigh of relief. Lang clenched his fists. In fact, he was more passionate about destroying the Horde than anyone else. The fall of Stormwind City was a pain in his heart. As long as the Horde was not destroyed, the southern continent's Stormwind City would not be able to recover. Of course, the happiest person was Torrina's. Being trapped in a siege, he was the one who suffered the most. The vast territory of Lordaeron would be cut off, and no one knew what would happen to the other areas. Torrina's was still mature and steady. "All right, I suggest that we urgently summon Chief Lothar to discuss this matter." "Of course, I suggest that we strengthen the defenses of the city and wait for Chief Lothar's arrival." Duque's suggestion was naturally seen as reasonable, and was unanimously approved. After the meeting, Duque waited outside the hall for an unexpected person, the Prince of Lordaeron, Arthas. "Your Excellency Marcus, can I have a word with you?" Duque hesitated for a moment but still nodded. They sat down in a side hall, and Arthas seemed to be venting his frustrations as he told List what had happened. "On the night I abandoned the 3,000 civilians, I received a long reprimand from my father. He scolded me for not learning how to be a king. A king should put the people first. Although I think what my father said is right, I still think that my decision that day was not wrong. There is no comparison between the lives of 3,000 civilians and the lives of 300,000 people." Duque's voice was calm. "Do you love your father and sister?" "Of course," Arthas replied without hesitation. "What if the enemy captures your father and sister and forces you to choose between them?" "No. I will never let a situation where I have to choose between the two happen." Arthas suddenly became furious. "That's right. As a king, you must first prevent the worst from happening." Chapter 442. But I can't avoid it. Arthis clenched her fists tightly. That fellow Ichina's claims to be the regent, but he wants me to make decisions at crucial moments. There are many things I don't know. By the time I find out, I already have to choose the lesser of two terrible decisions. I don't understand. In essence, what's the difference between me and you, the commander, when making decisions? The surroundings immediately fell silent. Even though this side hall was empty, who knew if someone was eavesdropping next door? No, it should be said that Duque was certain that someone was eavesdropping. He didn't even need the system notification to hear the heavy breathing. Duque didn't know who it was. Duque only knew that he had to be careful with his words. Duke rested his chin on his hand. Can I ask you a question that is a little cruel? Go ahead. Arthis made an inviting gesture. You're drifting on the sea with a ship full of refugees with no hope of rescue. Suddenly, you discover that a third of them are infected. What will you do? Arthis revealed a pained expression. I'll have that third jump into the sea, quarantine, and then leave the infected to fend for themselves. This was the most common way to deal with a plague in this era. Duque didn't comment. What if you discover that the remaining half are infected as well? Have them jump into the sea as well. Arthis's voice had already become softer. After a while, you'll discover that half of the remaining people. Enough. You're interrogating my conscience and soul. Arthis's eyes were bloodshot as she slammed the table and stood up. No, I'm not interrogating your conscience and soul. Duque looked at Arthis coldly. I'm just telling you, don't use your shallow common sense to judge every problem and force yourself into a dead end. The biggest difference between you and the commander is that you consider problems comprehensively. Comprehensive. Yes, I was just asking you what to do. I'm not forcing you to deal with things according to the rules of this era. Arthis was stunned. Then what to do? Duque's voice became stern. Have you learned any medical knowledge? Have you asked if there are any doctors among the refugees? Is there a priest? Have you confirmed the type of plague? Is there any hope of a cure? Arthis was bombarded by 5 consecutive questions, and he tried to defend himself. But I don't have any common sense at all. That's why I asked you to find out if there are any doctors among the refugees. As the commander-in-chief, it doesn't matter if you don't understand. You can just leave it to the experts. You need to appoint someone who looks like the most reliable person to be your advisor. If you don't know how to choose, then let the people in that area choose one themselves. If you can't make a judgment, then let the experts do it for you. Arthis was shocked at first, but after the shock, she felt a kind of heartfelt admiration. It turned out that there was a reason why Duke Marcus, the deputy commander-in-chief of the Alliance and the Horde, who had won so many great battles, was successful. Was this the difference between him and a top commander? That's right. After receiving the warning from the deputy commander, since the regent minister was incompetent, he should shoulder the responsibility and arrange things as comprehensively as possible instead of doing nothing and waiting for the situation to deteriorate before making a painful choice. Arthis lowered his head and bowed deeply to Duke. I've learned a lot. Sir Marcus, I only have one last question. Ask. Arthis asked solemnly, what if in the end, I have no one to rely on and no common sense in this area, and I have to make my own choice? You will avoid the worst situation, and at the same time increase your options. The lack of a better choice itself proves that your vision is too narrow. If your wisdom and insight are not enough to create some better choices for you, then choose the choice that you feel the most guilty about. If you really try your best, your heart will feel better. At least you can comfort yourself. Comfort myself? Arthis was a little dazed, and her whole body was dizzy. As if she was sleepwalking, she thanked Duque again and then left. Duque watched Arthis, who was supposed to become the Lich King in history, leave like this. Duque also sighed. He also felt that it was a pity for the fall of the historical Arthis. This could not be blamed on the historical Arthis. This itself was the plot of the most despicable and shameless demon, the most proficient in human nature. Duque did not know if he could reverse the future of Arthis's fall. Perhaps he could change the tragic fate of death like Lang, the Van Cleef father and daughter, Lillis and the others. Perhaps he could not, but at least he tried. Instead of regretting doing nothing, it is better to regret after doing it? Duque seemed to be talking to himself in a self-deprecating manner. Yes. Well said. A crisp female voice suddenly reached Duque's ears. Duque instinctively felt that the voice was a bit familiar. The next second he found out who the owner of the voice was, Princess Kalia Menethil. Duque was dumbfounded. Your Highness. The girl in a pure white, low-cut dress stood alone at the door of the side hall. Looking at the girl, who seemed to be suppressing her excitement and crossing her fingers in front of her chest, Duque suddenly felt a sense of purity. He did not know if there was a slight sigh in his breath. Obviously, at this moment, all the noise disappeared because of the girl's focus. Any other elements would be reduced to impure things. The pure, focused, and even a little fanatical light in the girl's eyes was overwhelming. It almost turned into a physical love, like a prayer that went straight to the heart. Duque almost instantly felt the adoration from the girl's eyes. Princess Kalia is madly in love with me? It had to be said that Princess Kalia was indeed a stunning beauty. Her exposed skin was crystal clear, and her body was so slender that it was like porcelain that would shatter with a touch. Her whole body exuded a kind of beauty that made people lose their minds. The problem was, Duque had never had any feelings for Princess Kalia. In Duque's eyes, the royal family of Lordaeron was a trap. He had no intention of befriending the royal family of Lordaeron at all. When he met Princess Kalia's eyes, Duque was stunned. Her breathing was heavy, and the girl was obviously very, very nervous. She seemed to have forgotten what she should say. The princess's voice was full of trembling, and she was a little incoherent. That day, thank you for the rose. I was most touched, when Lordaeron was about to be destroyed. You saved the whole city, and me. That's what I should do. Can you let me be your follower? Ha! Duque was stunned again. Chapter 443. When Duke said, "This is what I should do," the girl was in a state of confusion. The girl's mouth opened and closed slightly, shouting silently, "Duque, I've been." The girl's heart was like a willow branch swaying in the wind, wavering. The thumping of her heart could be heard clearly, shaking her eardrums and chest. Her chest was so uncomfortable. That overflowing feeling was like a volcano was about to erupt in her chest, as if it was going to tear her heart apart and break out in the next moment. The air had become dry, and her mouth was half opened like a machine with a locked angle, unable to open any wider. The slightly warm air invaded her lungs, and when she exhaled, it made her entire trachea and mouth feel like it was on fire. She was embarrassed, but her rationality was frantically urging her to take action. Duke Marcus was the most outstanding young man of this generation in the Alliance of the 10 Nations, the greatest hero. There was no one else like him. He was busy, glorious, and the hope of all mankind. If she gave up this chance to confess, she might not be able to wait for another chance. Countless voices rushed into Kalia's mind. Say it. Kalia. Muster up your courage. Kalia. Aren't you determined to be like those young girls courageously pursuing their love in novels, and grasp your own happiness? He is the Duke of the Southern Continent, and once the war ends, he will return to the Southern Continent. Father, who always wants to obtain more territory for Lordaeron, will not allow you to marry far away. Although she had the most glorious background in the entire continent, she was very clear that this princess identity that all women were envious of was not valued by Duque. There was no deliberate flattery, no fear of keeping a respectful distance, only a kind of calmness. Neither servile nor overbearing, but a gaze that made people feel extremely comfortable. This was what she wanted. This kind of young hero was what she had been chasing after in her dreams countless times. She shouted in her heart again. Take action. Kalia. Her rationality was driving her to take action. And then Kalia mustered up every drop of courage in her body, and what she thought was a shout was actually the volume of her voice. Can you let me be your follower? Oh my God. What nonsense did I say? I should have said, are you willing to go out with me? But how shameful. I can't say something like that. Woo. Kalia cried. The young girl cried bitterly in her heart. especially after seeing Duque's stupefied expression. The girl was so ashamed that she wanted to die. What did I say? Gritting his teeth, he squeezed out the last drop of courage in his body. I want to travel the world with you. Huh? Something didn't seem right. Wouldn't that become a standard follower's speech? I just need to say that I like him normally. Woo woo woo. But Duque was keenly aware of Princess Kalia's intentions. As a veteran player who had transmigrated on the eve of version 6.0, Duque did not know that Princess Kalia would become the most popular follower of the Priest Temple in the later timeline. This did not prevent Duque from having a better impression of Princess Kalia. Duque stared at Princess Kalia. Her golden waterfall-like hair was tied into a unique bun at the back of her head, revealing her slender, ivory-white neck. There was a faint blush on her cheeks, and her serious and anxious expression made people feel as if they were in a dream. At this moment, Princess Kalia showed her most girlish side, the kind of pure beauty that made all men's hearts palpitate with excitement, and could not help but want to protect her. In addition, she exuded a noble and extraordinary temperament with every movement she made. This was a fatal temptation to any normal man. Phew. After a short moment of confusion, Duque's brain worked at high speed. In terms of feelings and senses, it would undoubtedly be more than enough to satisfy any man's vanity if he managed to woo the renowned elder sister of Earthes, a genuine and noble princess of noble lineage. Think about it, if this Lich King Arthas, who had once been the Prince of Lordaeron in history, had defeated more than 17 heroes, including 3 kings and a blue dragon, and made the whole continent and even the world of Azeroth tremble, he would have no choice but to call Duque brother-in-law. Oh, that kind of sourness, just thinking about it would make one feel high. Unfortunately, reason told Duque that this was courting death. Just as Duque could not touch Arthas now, Duque could not touch Princess Kalia either. If the wheel of history could not be stopped, then the ending of World War II at the Dark Portal was almost a foregone conclusion. Then World War III was inevitable. According to the original history, all investments in Lordaeron were destined to be reduced to nothing under the fierce attack of the Calamity Army. If 1 million gold was exchanged for coins and thrown into the sea, it would at least cause a huge splash. However, investing in Lordaeron in any form was destined to fail. It was not the kind that would fail from the end of the street, but directly to the center of the earth. Thinking of this, Duque made a decision. The princess would accept it, but he would not let Lordaeron get a single cent. Duque shamelessly used the moral integrity of a Mediv. At this moment, Duque was possessed by a saint. Unknowingly, he had the purest temperament and the greatest sentiment. Duque's gentle smile, those eyes that seemed to be able to suck in one's heart, and that magnetic voice intoxicated the inexperienced Princess Kalia. There are as many people who wish to become my follower as there are stars in the sky. Kalia, what do you know? Princess Kalia was sensitive to the fact that Duque did not use words that made her uncomfortable like princess or highness, but called her by her name more intimately. It was clearly a very common thing in people's daily lives, but it made Kalia ecstatic. Can I call you Duque? Duque nodded with a smile. I'm actually an intermediate commandment priest. After saying that, Kalia showed Duque her holy light. It was indeed extremely pure holy light, and her cultivation was not low. Duque was dumbfounded. Duque had taken in many subordinates. There were a few future marshals and heroes. There were some who could fight, some who could eavesdrop, some who could lead troops, and some who could take charge. However, there was really no pure healing profession. A priest who specialized in healing was a big healer. A big healer. Do you understand? A group of old men fighting bloody battles at the front, and almost dying from serious injuries. To revive them, they often relied on the most crucial mouthful of milk. Oh no, greater healing skill. At this moment, Duque was even more determined to abduct Princess Kalia. Chapter 444. Not a bad holy light. Kalia, you pass. Then Duque smiled. I've received your kindness. I'm not an unreasonable person who ignores a good wish. Do you want to get rid of this suffocating life in the palace? Get rid of this suffocating life? In Kalia's pitch-black mental world, a bolt of azure lightning suddenly flashed, almost illuminating her entire soul. Yes, a suffocating life. Even though there were countless people around her who envied her, who knew the pain and suffering she had gone through. Since she was young, she had received the strictest training in palace etiquette. She had to smile without showing her teeth, wave her hands to limit the angle, take every step according to etiquette, straighten her neck, level her eyes, and wear that suffocating corset every day for the sake of her figure. She could only eat a little, no matter how good the food was. Kalia, you're going to marry a future king. You must have the strictest requirements for yourself. Mother said this every day. She lived like a puppet every day. All kinds of lessons followed one after another. She had to be stared at every moment, every minute and every second. When had she ever truly had her own space and time? She was infatuated with Duque. Was she really infatuated with a hero? Or did she yearn for that kind of safety and freedom? Kalia's eyes turned red in an instant. Can I really do it? Won't I bring trouble to you, Duque? For a second, Duque felt a little guilty, feeling like he was a bad uncle who used a lollipop to kidnap a little girl. But thinking of the despicable things that Tyrrhenas did after the Second War of the Dark Portal, and how Tyrrhenas allowed the orcs to have a chance to rise again, Duque felt no more guilt. Anyway, there was a high chance that Lord Darren would still have to kneel. Instead of letting this innocent princess become homeless, why not I, Duque, be kind and adopt the homeless princess in advance? Ahem. Duque righteously encouraged the Mediva's moral integrity, his face full of holiness that was even more holy than a paladin's. Yes, Korea. Everyone has the right to pursue freedom. If one is like a puppet for the rest of one's life, bound by bloodline and rules, can that still be considered as having truly lived? Kalia's defenses were completely shattered. She didn't even know when she was so excited that she held Duque's hand with both hands. She also didn't realize that from this angle, Duque could see the peak of the mountain. Then my father, mother, and my brother. Kalia suddenly showed a trace of pain. With or without you, Arthas will be crowned king. Lord Darren will still be the most powerful kingdom in the world. Duque, who knew the direction of history, lied through his teeth. That's true. Thinking of the power of the Rotterdam and her brother's outstanding king's potential, Kalia suddenly felt at ease. Then when will you take me away? I'm willing to take the risk to bring you out of this cage, and bring you to a wider world. But not now. The war between the Alliance and the Horde hasn't ended yet. I can't do anything to break the Alliance. At this point, the light in Kalia's eyes dimmed. But Duque's next words ignited the light of hope in her eyes again. Within this year, the war will probably end. At the latest, within a year. Really? Only a puppy would lie to you. Princess Korea left contentedly. Duque also left. As he left the palace, Duque glanced at Alusia. Even when her family and country were facing great changes, this eldest daughter of the Bear of family still followed him obediently. Duque quietly sighed. If he remembered correctly, when this war ended, Tyrrhenas would use the excuse that Eden Pyreus had colluded with the Horde and betrayed the Alliance. As the leader of the Alliance, Tyrrhenas would attack Alterax's territory. As the leader of the Alliance, Tyrrhenas was extremely noble when it came to fighting against the Horde. But this greatness was actually based on two reasons. First, the threat of the Horde was indeed big enough. Second, Tyrrhenas wanted to take advantage of the invasion to unify the 7 human kingdoms and rebuild the new Arather Empire with Lord Darren as the core. Tyrrhenas' original intention was to expand Lord Darren's influence in the Alliance. But as the war went on, that was not the case. Silverpine Forest was destroyed, and soon Tirisful Woodland would also be in trouble. Now that Lord Darren had almost fallen, King Tyrrhenas did not have the time to think about these things. When he could take a breather, he would probably have to face the tragic situation in his country and the pressure from the powerful alliance of nobles. Disaster relief required money. Reconstruction required money. The people were starving. The nobles were complaining. Yet the alliance won against the Horde, an outsider, and gained almost nothing. The Horde were a bunch of damn bachelors. They didn't have money, they only had their lives. After this war ended, Most of the countries could only silently lick their wounds like beasts. Even as strong as Lordaeron, they would go from rich to poor in an instant. The other countries did not care about Lordaeron because of practical difficulties. By then, it would be very natural for Lordaeron to want to attack Alterac. Not to mention that the Bear of families Fief, Caer Darrow and Darrowshire bordered Lordaeron's territory. It was so convenient and had a perfect excuse. If not Alterac, who would they eat? Of course, this was from Lordaeron's point of view. To Duque, he was very unhappy. When the alliance fought against the Horde, every family lost money. There was no benefit at all. Why was Lordaeron the only one to gain territory? In his heart, Duque scolded. It's fine if Lordaeron is a big country. Since we're all the same, don't pretend to be a saint. Isn't it better to be more direct? Terenas, if you're too ugly, I don't mind making you cry. Since he had transmigrated, and knew the general direction of history, Duque would be too stupid not to make arrangements. No one knew that Duque had made so many arrangements before the end of the war. They only knew that the diligent deputy commander visited the leaders of several countries to coordinate the troops again. Then on the second day Lothar arrived. The brave Lothar arrived on a griffin. Duque, without saying anything else, Lothar came up and gave Duque a bear hug. It's been hard on you. Lothar did not say it out loud, but his eyes were already wet. Then, Lang came up too, and the two of them hugged each other tightly. Chapter 445. It hadn't been an easy day. The situation of the battle had been reported to Lothar. Lothar, who knew the army well, was also clear about how advantageous the current situation was for the alliance. If Orgrim really led the elites to attack Rotterdam City, it would undoubtedly be a fatal blow to the morale of the alliance. To be honest, hundreds of thousands of people had died in the war, and the actual number of deaths was definitely more than 1 million. In particular, the lands of the various countries had fallen one after another. If Rotterdam, the symbol of the spirit of the alliance, were to fall, the morale of the alliance would definitely collapse, and the kings of the various countries would only care about themselves. However, Duque managed to defend Rotterdam City. Not only did he manage to defend it, but he also created an opportunity to annihilate the orcs. Even Lothar, a veteran commander who had been immersed in the military for the first half of his life, felt that he was inferior to Linley. At the beginning of the establishment of the alliance, Lang and Anduin had the mentality that they would die on the battlefield even if they had to cling to the ideals of restoring their nation. Now they really saw hope for the revival of Stormwind. The tribe was already weak, and they were just short of a blow to make the tribe go from being on the offensive to being on the defensive. Well done, Lang said softly, but he had subconsciously tightened his grip. Lang's grip was not as strong as Anduin's, but it was not much weaker. Duque felt a little pain. Anduin, the bastard, glanced at Aurelia who was waiting quietly not far away, and then solemnly said to Duque, "Duque, it's time for you to train up." F***ck. Duque cursed. Almost at the same time, Anduin was almost hit by an arrow. An arrow made of wind brushed past Lothar's head. If it weren't for the fact that the commander had reacted quickly and lowered his head, he would probably have turned from a handsome man with long hair to a bald man. Illyria's noble and elegant demeanor. That smile that would make anyone feel as if they were bathing in the spring breeze. Who would have thought that this Windrunner general, who theoretically belonged to the Stormwind Kingdom, had just assassinated the commander of the Alliance? It was over. The highest level of the Alliance's military conference officially began. The topic was very simple. It was how to wipe out the two invading tribes. Just as Anduin arrived at Rotterdam City, Grom Hellscream's tribal army had already arrived less than 30 kilometers to the west of Rotterdam City. Of course, the Silverpine Forest Southern Army led by Lothar was also 30 kilometers behind this tribal army. After confirming the battle report again, Anduin raised his head and asked Duque, "Are you sure the tribe in the west doesn't know about Gul'dan's betrayal?" Duque shrugged. "I can only say 90%. After all, there is no magic communication in the tribe. Moreover, I've already ordered Kudran's griffins to intercept any messengers from the tribe's dragon riders day and night. Kudrin's rumbling voice sounded. My compatriots have tried their best. I sent 30 squads to take turns to sweep the area, but they did not find any dragon riders. Duque waved his hand to show that it was fine. According to my calculations, even Orgrim's main force would only find out about Gul'dan's escape tonight. The terrain of the Alterac Mountains is too complicated. Intercepting messengers is not very effective. However, as long as we can intercept the messengers heading to the Western Front. At this time almost all the big shots' eyes lit up. There were no fools here. Everyone could imagine how the morale of the main force of Orgrim, near the Alterac Mountains, would be affected when they found out about Gul'dan's betrayal. Retreat was almost an inevitable choice. More importantly, the Western army of the Horde still did not know. Grom's people were still foolishly following the previous orders, and heading to Rotterdam City to prepare for the two armies to join forces and attack the city. To be honest, if Gul'dan's two clans were here, 150,000 elites of the Horde, a large number of twin-headed ogres and mages, as well as a freakishly strong Gul'dan, it would be hard to tell who would win if they fought against the Alliance. But it was completely different now. The Alliance could use the time difference to gather their forces and take down the Western army of the Horde when the main force of Orgrim wanted to retreat. That way, the entire Tirisful forest would not be destroyed. Be it Rotterdam or the Alliance, they would have more confidence to launch a counterattack. This was a great opportunity to take revenge on the Horde, and even build a career. It was an unprecedented glory to annihilate a tribal army in an organized way. Everyone cast their eager gazes at Anduin. At this time, Anduin looked at Duque instead. If I want you to defend Rotterdam City to the death, and not let a single tribe come to the west of Rotterdam City for 3 days, how many troops do you need? Without hesitation, Duke raised his palm, and his 5 fingers appeared in front of his eyes. 50,000? Anduin looked at it, and felt that it was a little too little. But since Duque said it was possible, it should not be a problem. In the entire alliance, there was no other commander under his command who could make him feel at ease. Turayan grew quickly, but Turayan was the kind of general who did things step by step. He could do any task assigned to him well, but he could not create surprises, not to mention miracles. In the next second, Duque made everyone look at his miraculous halo. No, I mean leave me a squadron of Griffin Knights. Together with Kuel Salas and my rangers and mages, 5,000 people will be enough. Any more is just to make up the numbers. If you like it, leave 30,000 new soldiers and 5,000 city guards for me. The city guards would not be counted as combat power by the big shots of the Alliance. Everyone knew that infantrymen who had not gone through strict military training would be like sending food to the elites of the upper tribes. Of course, it was another matter for some of the experts who had reached the level of champion knights. Orgrim wouldn't let his entire frontline army be annihilated. Even if they really wanted to break out of the encirclement, 150,000 elite beastmen breaking out of the encirclement was a completely different concept in terms of deterrence compared to 50,000 beastmen. It was conceivable that even if Orgrim retreated, he would find a way to go through the north of Rotterdam City and meet up with Grom's Western Legion before leaving in a dignified manner. Without a complete defensive line, the Alliance would have no choice but to send the 150,000-strong horde out of the northern continent as if they were sending off a king. As for when they would launch a counterattack on the southern continent, only God knew. Now, Dooku actually boasted that 5,000 men would be enough? There was a commotion in the meeting room. Duque sighed. All right, let me show you the new product of my weaponry workshop. Kill 3,000 Type A. Chapter 446. Kill 3,000 Type A? What the hell was that? Many of the leaders of the Alliance were confused, such as King Salas of Stormguard and General Haas of Alterac. Only those who had worked with Duque before had a strange look on their faces. Apart from Duque's human-like appearance, anyone would think that Duque was a dwarf in human skin just by looking at his so-called inventions. Yes, it was those guys in the furnace fort who had wild ideas. No, they had wild ideas. Goblins loved explosions. Explosions were the art of the goblins. When they blew up their enemies, they would also send themselves to hell. Dwarves loved to court death. Unreliable inventions were the hallmark of the dwarves. Before the fall of Nomorigan, seeing the dwarves spend a lot of money on all kinds of unreliable inventions was enough to give the kings of the Alliance a heart attack. But Duque was definitely an exception. He did not have many inventions, but each one could completely change the situation on the battlefield. From the FFF flamethrower, which was famous for roasting orcs in the western battlefield, to the demon spirit, which forced the trolls to jump into the river in the eastern forest. Although there were only 2 inventions, Duque had the confidence to use them for military purposes, mass production. And it was a huge success. Now at the most critical moment, there was a new invention? The leaders of the Alliance were stunned. Duque snapped his fingers. Please come to the Imperial Garden. Your Majesty Menethil, please inform the guards in the palace not to panic when they hear the explosion. Tyreenas nodded. The show began. After a loud explosion, the leaders of the Alliance were shocked. How much of this do you have? 5,000. Not enough. Anduin and Tyreenas said in unison. Duque shrugged. I'm out of money. I don't have enough gunpowder. You know how greedy the goblins are. Tyreenas panicked. If I give you the money immediately, how much can you make in the shortest time possible? 50,000 in 24 hours. This battle concerned the safety of Lordaeron City. If they failed, or if Lordaeron City fell before the Western Legion was destroyed, Tyreenas would not even have a place to cry. Knowing that Duque should have some cash on hand, Tyreenas had no choice but to give Duque 2 million gold coins. Just like that, as the Alliance prepared to encircle and annihilate him, Orgrim was forced into a corner. First, the troops that he fell behind were ambushed by the Alliance. The Silverhand Knights, who were supposed to help the main force of the Rotterdam retreat, actually used griffins to carry them to the Alterac mountain after getting rid of the tribe's pursuit. These were the most capable elites of the Alliance. They directly attacked the rear of the tribe on the mountain path. The number of Knights of the Silverhand was barely over 100, but each of the paladins could fight against 10, or even 100. The tribe, which originally had the advantage of individual soldiers in the mountains, was directly defeated by the Silver Hand. Orgrim waited in the valley at the foot of the mountain for 3 days, and only managed to gather a little more than 10,000 people. Perhaps less than 2,000 people had been killed, but most of them had been defeated. The orcs who had lost their leader ran all over the mountain. And for some reason, the Silver Hand purposely let go of the ogres who were the biggest threat to the city wall, and instead targeted the commander of the tribe to kill. Orgrim had a bad feeling about this. On the same day that Lothar arrived at Lordaeron City, Orgrim finally received a piece of news that he did not want to hear. Great Chief! Orgrim glanced around and saw one of his soldiers pointing to the sky. Could it be that more griffins were coming? He thought in disgust. If the Alliance did not have these annoying guys, the Horde would have dominated the entire sky with the help of the Red Dragon army. Unfortunately, before Zulu had brought back a new batch of red dragons from the grim battle fortress in the wetlands, the Horde had no choice but to watch the griffins shit on their heads every day and monitor their movements. But Orgrim was still worried. These dwarf griffin knights were very strong, their mounts were fast, and their stormhammer was as deadly as the orcs' warhammers. Although they were small, they could not be ignored. So if more griffins were to attack, he had to make sure that the trolls were ready to fight. The black shadow grew bigger and bigger. Its body was very long, and it was obvious that it was not a griffin. As it approached, the great chief heard the cheers of his soldiers. A young red dragon over 1,000 years old. That was good news. This huge creature could easily intimidate over 100 griffins. When a dragon was over 1,000 years old, its attack, defense, and speed would be greatly improved compared to a young dragon who was less than 1,000 years old. When a young dragon stepped into the realm of giant dragons, he could use magic. And it was the kind of powerful draconic magic that could be used at high speed without the need for incantations. Giant dragons were definitely the most terrifying existence on the battlefield. The dragon landed on the riverbank next to the small river that ran across the valley. As soon as it touched the ground, a burly orc jumped down from the saddle on the dragon's back. Orgrim swung his hammer over his back and strode forward to meet the enemy. "Where is the great chief?" the dragon knight shouted. This is an emergency. I'm right here. As Orgrim replied, all the Horde warriors parted like a tide, automatically making a path for him. What's the matter? Gul'dan, that bastard, is finally willing to come over? The Dragon Knight turned around to face Doomhammer. Orgrim immediately recognized him. He was a trusted aide of Zul'Uherd, and a very capable warrior. It was said that he was one of the first people who dared to tame a giant dragon. Thorgrim. Yes, that was his name. Great Chief, please come over. Thorgrim waved his hand. Orgrim proudly walked into the circle formed by the dragon's tail. The others understood that this was definitely a highly confidential matter. Even the chief's personal guards took a few steps back to let them talk alone. Speak. Before Thorgrim spoke, his broad face had a strange and complicated expression. Orgrim could see that there was anger, confusion, and even shame and fear. Thorgrim did not dare to look the great chief in the eye. Gul'dan escaped. After you left the borders of Kuel Salis with your main force, he and Gujar took the Twilight Hammer, and the rest of the Storm Predator clan with them. After they reached the hinterlands, they sailed into the Endless Sea and headed south. Chapter 447. What? Impossible. Only then did Orgrim understand why Torghese had such a complicated expression of fear on his face. In his rage, he felt the blood in his body boil. His hand gripped the handle of his hammer so tightly that the wood of the handle made a cracking sound. Orgrim couldn't control his emotions at all. He pulled out his warhammer and swung it in the air, drawing a dark arc in the air. Asterisk bang. Asterisk, the hammer smashed into the ground, and it sank deep into the ground. The violent bombardment caused a large amount of rubble to fly out. The momentum was quite terrifying. Not only were the guards on guard nearby startled, but even the young red dragon Torghese was startled. The dragon stared at Orgrim with its eyes that were filled with caution and shock. I knew it. I knew that the altars he made would have a huge problem. I was stupid enough to let him transform those ogres to fill the gaps in his army. The chief's eyes were bloodshot, and he even let his fangs sink deep into his lips. The sharp fangs were stuck in his lips, and blood immediately seeped out. Why was I so stupid? He had warned himself countless times that this warlock was selfish, but at that time, the pressure from the magic of humans and elves was too great. In order to get a weapon that could fight against magic, he was too excited and neglected this point. I shouldn't have treated this guy who sold souls to demons as a beastman. The thousands of years of beastman rules made Orgrim ignore Gul'dan. Before the establishment of a tribe, the beastman clans always used the bravest method to resolve all conflicts. If there were any objections, they could meet at Makagora. Once the winner was decided, the loser would unconditionally obey the orders of the winner. Gul'dan was too cunning, so cunning that he was not a beastman at all. He did not resist Orgrim's annihilation of the Shadow Council, and he humbly submitted to the chief. Then he was even more human than the despicable humans, and when the tribe needed him the most, he cheated the entire tribe. Great Chief, Zul'Uherd suggested that we should send out a hunting team to punish these traitors. Gul'dan's sorcery cannot protect all the ships, but we can give him enough pain. Great Chief, please give the order. While Torghese was waiting for the great tribal chief's order, another orc ran over. Sabek, the young second-in-command of the Blackrock clan. He was promoted after the two sons of the previous chief, Blackhand, decided to split off and form a new clan. Because of Orgrim's rage, the young dragon beside them was slapping the ground with its tail. Sabek had no choice but to stop 5 or 6 meters away from it. Great Chieftain, Hellscream's army is already not far from the west of Lordaeron. Should we attack now or wait for Gul'dan? When Gul'dan and the others come, we'll have more people. Orgrim smiled bitterly. However, his thoughts were still moving very quickly. More people. No one else will come here. Sabek's face was full of shock. Gul'dan betrayed us. Orgrim looked at his assistant and told him what had happened with great difficulty. Then what should we do? Sabek immediately suggested angrily. Betrayal must be punished severely. We should immediately go back and wipe out Gul'dan and his clan. Are you out of your mind? Grom's Warsong clan is attacking the west gate of Lordaeron as agreed. Are you going to abandon our brothers and take revenge on your own? Orgrim roared. Both Sobek and Togiz were speechless. Togiz set off immediately. Inform Grom to stop attacking the human city. Tell him and his people to attack the human camp in the north. We'll attack from both sides. We'll meet up after destroying the human camp. Then we'll go back and take revenge on Gul'dan. At this moment, Togiz's young dragon suddenly spoke in the common language. I refuse to die for such a stupid order. The dwarves have at least 500 griffins and a griffin king waiting for me. Even I can't break through this encirclement. Orgrim's gaze suddenly sharpened. You mean the alliance was prepared? It seems so. They purposely let me in, but they made it seem like they forbade me from flying west. When the dragon said this, Orgrim was shocked. He suddenly thought of a possibility. Could it be that the humans already knew that Gul'dan would betray them? Or perhaps the humans had colluded with Gul'dan and plotted against the entire horde. This wasn't something inconceivable. Since Alterax's king almost joined the horde, why couldn't that despicable bastard Gul'dan work with the humans? Right. That must be it. Orgrim could almost imagine that the damned Duke Marcus was gathering all his forces to prioritize the extermination of the exhausted Western Legion. No. I can't let this happen. Orgrim leapt onto a boulder and raised his warhammer in a battle stance. He roared at the warriors and the chieftains of the smaller clans who were looking at him. Gul'dan betrayed the beastmen. He betrayed the entire horde. The Duskhammers and the Stormskimmers have taken our ships and are heading south. As soon as he finished speaking, the beastmen around him erupted into a frenzy. They raised their weapons high and cursed Gul'dan in the most vicious manner possible. Everyone stared angrily towards the south, as if Gul'dan and his lackeys were just a little behind the horizon. Now the glory of our people has reached a moment of life and death. But at the same time, our brothers from the Warsong clan are surrounded by 300,000 human soldiers. So we must first take down the human camp in the north, then seek revenge on Gul'dan. Orgrim's strategy was completely correct. He had always been a qualified leader, looking at every problem from the perspective of the entire horde. However, he neglected one thing. The horde was still made up of many clans. This time his words didn't receive a warm response. Most of the beastmen looked at him silently, no one responding to his call. Orgrim was shocked. He understood what the beastmen were thinking. Since the glory of the horde was the most important, then we should first deal with that traitor Gul'dan. The Warsong clan? Weren't Grom Hellscream's Warsong clan very good at fighting? Let them deal with it themselves and the humans catch up. Chapter 448. Orgrim's hands were trembling from the shock and the rage he was suppressing in his heart. Victory was only one step away from him. He had thought that he would only need a few more days to take over the most important city of the Alliance and crush the will of the Alliance, turning them into stray dogs that would scatter the moment they met the horde. Now he no longer had that chance, and the chances of victory were slim. But in his heart, glory was always the most important thing. Orcs who lost their glory were worthless. Killing the enemy was glory. Saving their brethren was glory. Killing the traitors was glory too. None of these could be left out. But why was everyone so eager to kill the traitors first? Orgrim saw the fear and hesitation in the eyes of the lesser chiefs. Fear? Hesitation? Were they still orcs? Just as Orgrim was about to explode, he suddenly saw a huge flag the size of the city gate rise from the east gate of Lordaeron. It was that damn Duke Marcus blue storm flag again. The chief's body trembled involuntarily. He understood now. This was the consequence of his failure to win against Duke. It was a huge explosion after accumulating so many times. Most orcs were innocent. Without so many twists and turns, they didn't know what a strategic retreat was. They only knew that their chief had never won against the owner of the blue storm flag even once. Or rather, winning was still considered a loss. When he refused to attack Cuel Salus, he was once again thought that he was afraid of Duke. Or rather, these lesser chiefs who had suffered under Duque no longer had any hope of winning against Duque. They would rather deal with Gul'dan, who also seemed quite strange. Orgrim felt aggrieved. Tomorrow, the entire army will advance and attack the camp in the north of the human city. If anyone disagrees with my orders, then Makara will take care of them. If not, then go and prepare. Orgrim forcefully used his authority as the chief to approve this attack plan. After giving orders to the chiefs and their deputies, Orgrim was the only one left. The next day, Grom saw smoke rising from the other side of Lordaeron, even though he did not receive any specific orders from Orgrim. One far away, two near. 3 smoke signals. This is the signal to attack. Smoke was a simple form of communication, and could only be used to send simple signals. Seeing that the humans did not stop them from attacking the city, Grom subconsciously thought that Orgrim was pressuring the humans. From the very beginning, Grom had been attacking with his entire army. In less than half an hour, there was good news. "We're about to take the gate," an orc roared. Grom Hellscream's rugged face broke into a smile. Victory was right in front of them. Before this, no matter how many warriors he sent, they would not be able to take down the thick defensive line between the Silverpine Forest and the Tirisful Woodlands, but the situation had changed. While passing through the line of defense abandoned by the humans, Grom saw with his own eyes a large number of fire-breathing iron lumps abandoned by the side of the road. To the orcs, moving those heavy things was not a problem, but it would be difficult for the humans to use carriages to move those things on the narrow forest muddy roads. Obviously, Orgrim's attack on the main city of the Alliance from the east had caused a lot of panic among the humans. In the many days of marching, Grom saw many abandoned supplies, and even wounded soldiers who committed suicide in despair. The humans were panicking. That was what Grom was sure of. Actually, his judgment was not wrong. Before returning to Lordaeron, if not for Duquesne's plan, the entire Lordaeron army would have been defeated by the Horde's western army. Even if they did not, other than Mograine's Scarlet Cross, the rest of the Lordaeron army would not have much combat power. Now the city gate had been severely deformed by the relentless attacks of the orcs. Once the gate was breached, his warriors would be able to rush into the city, kill the remaining guards, and raze the city to the ground. With this as a stronghold, they could quickly occupy other parts of the continent, drive the humans to the coast, and push them into the sea. In the end, the continent would belong to the Horde, and they would end this war and start a new life. After holding back for so long, Grom finally saw hope. He carried his famous huge axe, Bloodhowl, in the Alliance and the Horde and watched his soldiers attack the city gate once again. If only the two-headed ogres were here, Grom could not help but think. Those big guys would be able to climb up the city wall and use their weapons to carve a few holes in the thick stones. However, he was curious. Why did the battle cries sound like they were coming from the north of the city? Shouldn't it be better to attack the east gate if they wanted the humans to be distracted? But at this moment, there was a roaring sound from behind the city wall in the distance. Wind. Where did the wind come from? Looking from afar, a large golden cloud was gathering above the city gate at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then, accompanied by a golden bolt of lightning, it struck the orcs who were attacking the city gate. Suddenly, the black oil that had floated on the moat was ignited. Flames shot into the sky, and almost instantly, the orcs who were crossing the moat and climbing the city wall were burned into human-shaped torches. Fire? It's fire again? The golden thundercloud continued to gather in the orcs' direction. A few bolts of lightning fell on the orcs' huge siege weapons, exploding in the midst of the orc infantry, who were hiding behind the siege weapons and dodging arrows and javelins. With a few loud booms, flesh and blood flew everywhere. Grom's heart was bleeding. Those were the elites of the Warsong tribe. They had been through hundreds of battles and the baptism of fire in Silverpine Forest. They were wearing the thickest armor of the Horde. And yet they were electrocuted just like that? The golden thunderballs created a few large holes in the ground that could bury dozens of people. The rocks that were blasted into the air, the broken limbs of the orcs, and the pieces of armor that flew out caused secondary damage to the surroundings. For a moment, screams of agony could be heard. At this moment, huge red fireworks rose from the north, west, and south of the orc army. Suddenly, a loud horn sounded from the 3 directions at the same time. 3 to 4 kilometers away, what looked like a forest suddenly became a blur. Then, rows of humanoid figures wearing silver armor appeared in front of the orcs. The silver wave surrounded the orc army in the shape of a crescent. It felt like there were countless human soldiers. Their numbers had long surpassed the orcs' mathematical abilities. Ordinary orcs only knew that there were a lot of humans. Chapter 449. This number could not be described in any beastman language. On such a vast piece of land that was measured in kilometers, the line of soldiers could actually form a row. Under the guidance of the drums, the human army marched in an orderly manner, covering each other and sealing off any possible escape route for the beastmen. On the southern lake, many warships sailed towards the lakeside at high speed. Their hulls were parallel to the shore, and they opened up the wooden planks that blocked the cannons, preparing to fire. Where did the humans find so many elites? Grom cried out. After fighting with the humans for so long, he could tell which were the elites and which were the farmers. It had nothing to do with equipment. Those who stood in a crooked straight line were the farmers who were delivering food to the beastmen. Those who were neatly dressed and lined up in a clear formation were mostly the elites. Of course, this also depended on how shiny their armor was. For example, if the Lordaeron army had shiny armor, Grom would not have a headache. That was because it was likely that they were just guards of honor. Those whose armor was much duller and had many spots on their shields were the veterans that the beastmen did not want to meet. At this moment, they were all elites who had been through hundreds of battles. In the north, those who wore blood-red armor with white edges were their old rivals. They had fought against the Lordaeron Scarlet Cross many times. In the northwest, those with a blue griffin flag with golden edges were the Stormwind Griffin Legion that Orgrim had mentioned many times. In the west, those who carried huge brown tower shields and a few long spears were the Dalajan Infantry. The Dalajan Infantry had never been the focus. The focus was on the mages hidden behind them. If they could not break through the infantry's defenses within 3 minutes, they would immediately be taught a lesson by the magic shot from the rear. Grom suddenly understood why Orgrim wanted to attack the human camp in the north. He wanted to open up a path of blood and rescue the Western Legion. Grom made the correct decision almost immediately. Everyone listen up. Abandon all the siege weapons and turn to attack the Red Legion in the north. Being correct did not equal to being effective. When Mograine, who was leading the army, saw that the orcs were attacking them as Anduin had predicted, the future legendary High Lord sneered. You shall pay for the sin of destroying the Silverpine Forest with your lives. The neatly advancing army stopped the moment Alexandros Mograine raised his fist. The warriors at the very front used the spikes at the bottom of their tower shields to fix their shields deeply into the thick grass. Every 5 meters or so on the battlefront, a path would be opened up, allowing a group of unarmored young farmers with only a basket to run out and pluck the grass on the grassland in front of the formation. In front of him, a veteran with burn scars on his face used his index finger to wipe his saliva. He raised his hand and felt the direction and speed of the wind. Very good. As expected, he has the upper hand. Just before the orc army arrived, the boys plucked all the grass and quickly retreated. Then, a large group of weird-looking fellows with huge metal cans on their backs and half a shield in front of their chests walked out from the formation. They also had a large metal pipe on their right waist. The appearance of these fellows gave the commanders of the tribe a bad feeling. When they rushed to the front and saw the 3 words FFF on the shields on their upper bodies, everyone knew that their bad premonition had come true. Fire. Monstrous fire. More convenient flamethrowers, and even more flamethrowers. Hundreds of flamethrowers formed a belt of death that blocked the tribe's only escape route. The most disgusting thing was that the shields connected to the cans helped those fellows block most of the weapons thrown at them. Want to leave? Sure. But please go to the fiery hell first. Grom had no choice but to let the few warriors of the Blackstone clan take the lead. On the other side, Orgrim's attack had also suffered a huge setback. Before the battle, for some reason, Gavinrad's brain spasmed. Last time, he saw Aurelia defeat an entire army with a single banner, and he wanted to do it again. Even though Duque said no, this guy still went crazy and wanted to die. In the end, Tens of thousands of tribesmen chased after Gavin Rad. Duque almost died laughing. If this guy wasn't a paladin with thick skin and temporary invincibility, Gavin Rad would probably have died. Watching Gavin Rad court death in front of the northern camp was quite amusing. Duke glanced at Illyria beside him and curled his lips. What's the matter? Are you confident that you can defeat 40,000 tribal elites with just a few people? Aurelia flicked her slender fingers, and her beautiful blonde hair flew in the wind. She gave Duque a provocative look. Who do you think I am? I'm Aurelia Windrunner, a heroine destined to be remembered by the entire Alliance. Yes, yes, yes. Duque smiled and raised his hands in surrender. Walking down the simple wooden wall of the camp, Duque looked back at Aurelia and her 3 sisters who were standing on top of the gate. The 4 sisters each had their own strengths. It was already a blessing to have one of them as a subject. But now he had taken the entire Windrunner family with him. Just thinking about it made him feel like he was exaggerating. Looking at Aurelia's sexy back, Duque suddenly remembered a saying. Gold will always shine. Orgrim's army began to charge. Then they were attacked by the High Elven Rangers. Elven Rangers. The orc commander roared when he saw the archer's posture. The orcs immediately used all sorts of methods to protect their vitals. After experiencing the Battle of Quell the Loss, even if they had never faced the Elven Rangers directly, these orcs still clearly knew that these Elven Rangers with unreasonably accurate archery were the nightmare of all orcs. Trolls and orcs were all races with strong vitality. If they did not hit their vitals, they would not die immediately. In the early days of the Elven Forest, there were many orcs who were like porcupines, with hundreds of arrows stuck in their bodies and continued to fight. It was indeed easy to scare the humans. But now it was different. A green light that was almost the same color as the grass flashed past. The arrow actually hit the shoulder armor of a charging orc, and then refracted, piercing through the neck of the unlucky orc. Then, it hit the eye of the orc behind it with blood splattering everywhere. Another example was a powerful orc sword saint who deflected an arrow aimed at his face, only to find out that the arrow had killed an orc companion on his right. Chapter 450. There was no locust-like momentum. There was no storm of arrows. It was these silent arrows that caused a large number of beastmen to die without a sound. Instead, it created a terrifying atmosphere. Defense seemed to have lost its meaning. It seemed like it was a matter of one arrow. The charging beastmen were enraged. They roared and shouted all kinds of slogans in beastman language, as they charged madly at the wooden wall of the camp. Yes, as long as they broke through the thin wooden wall and dragged the enemy into close combat, the elves with thin arms and legs would not be a match for the beastmen. This was the proven experience of Kuel Salis in the 2 wars. It should have been like this. Suddenly, the beastmen at the front seemed to have stepped on something. Suddenly, there was a flash of lightning under their feet. Aha! The twisted electric current that lingered around the beastmen was clearly visible. These beastmen turned into charcoal in a few breaths. Mages? Orgrim's face twitched as he saw this scene from afar. This reminded him of Gul'dan. If Gul'dan did not betray them, why would the tribe be like the trolls against the elves, using human wave tactics to exhaust the enemy's magic power? Standing on the tallest 5-story command tower in the middle of the camp, Marion, a member of the Silver Moon Council, teased the beastmen. I bet that group of simple-minded green-skinned creatures will think that we mages are attacking. Duque kept an appropriate distance from this female elf with a murder weapon hidden in front of her chest. He smiled lightly. Don't worry, there will be a chance for you to make a move. That's good. It is our wish to serve Sir Marcus. With just a glass of champagne, Duque almost thought that Marion was chatting with him at a cocktail party. That kind of casual attitude, that robe that revealed just right, was enough to make any animal with excess hormones salivate. Fortunately, I recently settled Aurelia. Duque withdrew his gaze from Marion. Then he saw a group of confused beastmen. Electrocuted to death. Roasted to death. Blown to death. Frozen to death. Shot to death by arcane missiles. He was stabbed to death by a sharp thorn that suddenly shot out. There was a mess of everything. The power wasn't great, but it was enough to be fatal. Orgrim, who was commanding from the back, felt his scalp go numb. If the humans used simple weapons such as flames, he could use the Blackrock tribe members to charge through. For example, he could summon a frost troll to deal with frost. But unless it was a warlock with a demon hound, no orc would have such high magic resistance to the endless attacks. Fortunately, there were still some intelligent orc commanders who saw through it. Watch your step. Even though those things were disguised, they still revealed their true appearance. They were disc-shaped objects covered in grass and mud. The moment an orc stepped on it, it would be triggered. It didn't matter what kind of equipment you had, or what clan you were from. Once you stepped on it, you would either die or be crippled. Alright, here comes the problem. I have to pay attention to my feet. When I charge, I won't be able to charge fast, and I won't have the energy to defend against the arrows coming from the walls. He had to pay attention to the arrows, and he forgot about his feet. The orc's violent charge, which seemed to be able to drown everything in the world, suddenly slowed down. Aha! It reminds me of the first time I shot a hare with my bow when I was young. Servanas laughed as he shot the arrow. Because the difficulty of aiming had decreased, she could use the triple arrow without any restrictions. Anyway, the entire wooden wall was filled with quivers full of arrows. After all, the people of Lordaeron had the most armaments in the entire continent. Second sister, do you want to compete? Let's compete. The serious battlefield was turned into a hunting game by a few windrunners. After sacrificing more than 4,000 elites, the orcs finally got close to the walls of the camp. They brandished their heavy hammers violently, easily smashing the antlers and the walls of the village into pieces. The elven rangers jumped off the wooden wall, which was not very high. Unexpectedly, the rangers did not go far. They stood in the empty space behind the wooden wall, and continued to shoot arrows at a distance that was not considered suitable. Kill these long ears. The orc commanders shouted. Something unexpected happened again. The elven rangers retreated as they fought. In order to avoid traps, the orcs would often choose to step on the spots that the elves had stepped on. What the hell? Why were the elves fine when they stepped on the spots, but the orcs got shot when they stepped on them? Electrocution. Explosion. Violent death. The orcs suddenly realized that between the first and second walls, the traps on the ground were more concentrated. The density was so high that it was almost impossible to step on them. Yet the elves could come and go as if they were flying. Not to mention the elven rangers who were fighting below. Even Marion in the command tower was stunned. What a clever little thing. I can see that you have your mages and magic apprentices seal magic into scrolls and store it in the trap, but I don't see why our people are fine when they walk up to it, but the orcs fall for it. Marion said in admiration. Yes. Take your life 3000 Type A was simply a trigger mine that stored magic. It was the work of Duke's followers who had to work through the night to make it. Duke smiled mysteriously. Do you want to know this secret? Of course. Promise me to help me fight the war in Stormwind, and I'll tell you. Members of the Silver Moon Council must be approved by the council to participate in the war. Marion's beautiful eyes flickered as she gave Duke a knowing look. Then may I ask if we can invite Miss Marion to visit when we open the first floor of the library in Karazhan? That's more like it. Okay, the answer is wait. Without the weight of 4 high elves, those little things won't be triggered at all. Marion couldn't help but laugh. That simple? That simple. The orcs were more muscular than any other race in the Alliance. They were tall and strong, so naturally their weight increased. If a human weighed 150 kilograms, that would be a very tall and strong man. But this weight in the orcs was only equivalent to an ordinary warrior of a third-rate clan. For example, the strong warriors of the Blackrock clan were generally more than 3 meters tall and weighed more than 200 kilograms. If they were the personal guards of the chief, their height and weight would be even more exaggerated. The ogres were even more ridiculous. This was what Duque was using. When he designed it, he added a very thick piece of iron to the button of the mine. Without about 200 kilograms of weight, it was impossible to crush the iron to trigger the mine. This was why Take Your Life 3000 Type had almost no effect on the Elven Rangers, but to the orcs, they would be trampled to death. Chapter 451. Actually, before he made up his mind to attack the Alliance's camp in the north of Lordaeron, Orgrim had considered a choice. That was to ignore the camp and go around it from the north. Then the chief gave up. Firstly, the Alliance's camp was too big. It was at least 10 kilometers wide. Secondly, further north, for some reason, was a swamp that stretched for at least 20 kilometers. Of course, Orgrim didn't know that his scouts had encountered a swamp spell created by an elven mage. Also, the swamp behind them was just an illusion. After losing the support of Gul'dan's magic, the Horde became blind in this aspect. Orgrim could only choose to either break through the Alliance's camp or go around 60 to 70 kilometers to get to Grom's Warsong tribe. Obviously, taking such a long detour was a very dangerous choice when there were strong enemies around. This was a round trip. It wasn't strange for thousands of troops and horses to charge out of the Alliance's camp midway. Orgrim chose to attack the camp. The Horde attacked the Alliance in a calculated cone-shaped formation. In the middle were the ogres and the elites of the Blackrock tribe. On the flanks were the trolls. After a lot of sacrifices, the Horde's attack smashed the Alliance's line of defense like a sledgehammer. The elven rangers of the Alliance fought back with all their might. However, even with the help of a large number of Kill 3000 mines, they could not stop the advance of the Horde army. The dazzling light from the explosions lit up the eyes of more orcs. The unfortunate vanguard seemed to be surrounded by all sorts of colorful flashes that disrupted their optic nerves. They were then dismembered by all sorts of magic. Of course they died. Many orcs who were still breathing let out pitiful cries on the battlefield. However, the orcs could also hear the sound of wooden walls being smashed by giant hammers. Under the violent attacks of the orcs, the wooden walls that were as tall as 2 people were reduced to countless pieces of wood that flew in all directions. Loktar! An earth-shattering roar resounded throughout the battlefield. When the first wall of the camp collapsed, a loud roar came from the tribe. Victory was in sight. According to the orcs' understanding of humans, there would not be many walls in a camp. Usually, with only 3 walls, they would definitely be able to reach the core area. The orcs sacrificed 5,000 of their elites to reach the second wall. After another violent demolition, the second wooden wall also collapsed. This time, the orcs waited for the magic attack that they both wanted to see, but also did not want to see. On the wooden tower 100 meters away, the long robes of the high elven mages could be clearly seen. When the magic array floating in the air shone with a radiant light, it shot out beams of light and heat, forming a chaotic flow of flames that swept through the entire Beastman army. At the same time, over 1,000 sharp arrows stirred up a storm and rained down on the orcs. It was as if a gate of hell had formed on the side of the second city wall. Any beastman that dared to step into that domain would be sucked into the kingdom of death. Crimson red, orange, brilliant yellow, emerald green. Rays of exploding magic light stimulated the orcs' eyes. Coupled with the deafening sound, it was enough to drive any new soldier crazy on the battlefield. Mobilizing over 100 sky mages to bombard a single area was undoubtedly a waste. It had to be said that this tactic of concentrating firepower on one area had never failed since ancient times, and this time was no exception. The magic turbulence vortex that was continuously produced caused heavy casualties on the Horde side. At the same time, it also created a terrifying and embarrassing atmosphere. It was like pouring a bucket of ice water on the enemy's head when they were celebrating their victory, extinguishing their flames of arrogance. Orgrim grabbed Sobek's breastplate. Behind us is the main camp of the Alliance. Disperse the troops. Spread out your attacks. Don't attack the enemy's strongest point. For a moment, the tribe's soldiers seemed to want to retreat, but suddenly, under the command of the middle-level commander behind them, they gave up and moved horizontally to both sides. However, this was exactly what the Elven Ranger wanted. It turned out that when the orcs charged at them fiercely, the Rangers might not be able to replenish their arrows and catch their breath. Fighting in a minefield sounded as exciting and high-spirited as dancing on the tip of a knife. In fact, it was only when they started fighting that they realized that it was not as easy as they had imagined. That's right, The elves would not explode when they stepped on it. The problem was if an elven ranger did not notice the approach of an orc, and the orc stepped on, "Kill me 3,000, and exploded not far from the ranger, the magic did not have eyes, and it would still affect the ranger. The trolls also knew how to throw spears. Shooting arrows required concentration. Looking at the whole situation required concentration. This was not an easy thing to do. Even among the elites of the Windrunner family, more than a dozen people died because of a mistake. Of course, this was much better than fighting with the trolls in the forest without any cover. The horde who avoided the magic bombardment and took a detour did not know that they had actually drawn the lower part of the map. The high elven mages stopped casting spells and retreated to rest, leaving the battlefield to the rangers. Since there was no need to dodge, the elven rangers on the third wooden wall rained arrows down on the horde who had spread out. According to Queen Sylvanas, it was as easy as hunting. However, the horde had a simpler and more violent way to avoid the arrows. This group of barbaric fellows actually used more than a dozen orcs to lift the entire wooden wall with brute force, using the huge wooden wall as a shield and pushing deeper into the camp. When one orc was killed, another orc would immediately take the wooden wall. The elves were dumbfounded by this violent way of breaking through. Apart from the few rangers who had stepped into the realm of heroes, the other rangers could not do anything against such a huge shield. Duque had no choice but to let Marion do it. As a top-level mage who could be considered a weapon of mass destruction in any country, the Radiant Moon Marion easily created one explosive fireball after another without even aiming. Since her surname was Firewing, she was naturally a disciple of the Five Fireball Church. The frenzied flames painted oil paintings of blood and fire on the battlefield. Usually, the explosion of a large fireball meant that hundreds of orcs would lose their cover and die in the rangers' hunt. After the orcs paid the price of 1,000 deaths, the third wooden wall finally collapsed. Orgrim would not let go of this opportunity, and gave a simple but powerful order to the entire army: attack. Logically speaking, the main camp of the humans should be behind the 3 wooden walls. The horde's sacrifice of 7,000 was worth it. They charged forward with all their might, longing to do what they did in the elven forest. When the giant axe smashed through the weak door of the human house, what awaited them was the defenseless inner room. Chapter 452. The humans in the middle of a chaotic battle were not worth mentioning. The elated cheers from the beastmen instantly died down. Another wooden wall, another group of rangers, another group of mages, and another ground full of mines. This situation almost drove the beastmen crazy. But did they have a choice? A few kilometers away, the sounds of hundreds of thousands of people fighting could be heard clearly. Every second that passed, a large number of beastmen would die in battle. The various chiefs wanted to let Grom's Warsong tribe escape on their own. But the beastmen's violent nature meant that once they stepped onto the battlefield, they would not have any other thoughts. The centurion cursed and ordered the beastmen behind him to charge forward even more fiercely. Breakthrough. We've broken through the human wall. The cries of the beastmen from the front lines were filled with joy. However, Orgrim, who had already reached the first wall, did not seem to feel the joy of the frontline warriors. Too thin. When the great tribal chief said this, he sounded like a greenhorn orc recruit who was dissatisfied with not being able to satisfy his desire to kill. Sebek understood what his boss meant. The defensive formation built by Duque should not be broken through so easily. After all, Duke Marcus was a supermaster of defense in Stormwind City, Southshore, and other places that made hundreds of thousands of tribes suffer in a row. There will be another wall soon. Almost as soon as he finished speaking, the messenger at the front lines came to report that there really was another wooden defense line. With agility that did not match his size, Orgrim climbed up a human archer tower that had yet to be destroyed and looked towards the human camp. He thought that he would see the inside of the human camp. The great chief was disappointed. The alliance had obviously used some kind of magic. Above the new wooden wall, there was a thick fog that looked like a thick soup made by a wizard. It was impossible to see through. Magic. Magic again. This kind of non-offensive spell would not consume too much of the opponent's mana, but it was effective in making Orgrim feel defeated. Just how many wooden walls did the humans have? Now that this one has fallen, there might be another one. Orgrim's bad premonition came true in less than 15 minutes. At this moment, Orgrim finally understood Duque's sinister intentions. Despicable Duke Marcus. He doesn't have many soldiers. Orgrim had finally guessed correctly. All of Duque's troops added up were only a little more than 8,000 people. Less than 5,000 of them were actually involved in the battle. Not only did he not invest a lot of troops, but he also did not invest a lot of landmines. Orgrim thought that Duque was so rich that he would really scatter. Kill you 3,000. All over the camp. This was actually an illusion. At this moment, behind the wooden wall where Duque was, close to 1,000 recruits were busily laying mines. They put the mines on the ground as carefully as possible, and covered them with grass and dirt. And they were all following Duque's orders, laying mines according to the direction of the tribe's breakthrough. They wouldn't even place a minefield that was more than 100 meters long. Beside Duque, Aurelia, Lilith, and Hadgeron were wiping their sweat and resting. Are you tired? Duque asked. Aurelia replied with a confident smile. It's more intense than a warm-up. Duque glanced at the rangers under them. Although they had not reached the point of exhaustion, they had clearly exhausted a lot of their energy. Duque had set up so many lines of defense to deplete the energy of Orgrim's elites. If they did not rotate, what would it mean if they exhausted their energy first? At this moment, a magic message came. It was from Lothar. Duque, how's the situation on your side? Looking at the excited and nervous Lothar in the magic mirror, Duque answered Lothar with what everyone in the alliance called a confident smile. Hey Anduin, I've prepared 18 levels of hell for Orgrim from the first day for today's battle. Oh, it's 18 lines of defense. Unfortunately, the tribe didn't work hard enough, and they've only reached the 6th line of defense after fighting for so long. Duque shrugged, looking like he was trying to say, don't blame me for not being serious, just blame the tribe for not putting in enough effort. Not only did Lothar laugh, but even Aurelia laughed out loud. Duque was mesmerized by Aurelia's beauty. Lothar facebombed, thinking, it's so convenient to have a girlfriend who can fight. Even in the army, no one would dare to say anything bad about Duque. Ahem ahem. Lothar pretended to cough. Why? How long do you want me to hold on for? 3 days or a week? If Orgrim heard Duque's words, he would probably be infuriated to death. It was Lothar's turn to feel embarrassed. He had transferred so many of Duque's troops, and even made Duque do the hardest and dirty work. Lothar hurriedly said, No. It'll be good enough if you can stop the tribe for 2 more hours. Of course, if you can hold on until this evening, I can guarantee that not a single tribe will escape alive. Lothar's progress was indeed going well. With the army on 3 sides, the tribe seemed to Lothar to be in a desperate struggle. If they could let the Western Legion of the tribe escape, then the elite soldiers of the Alliance would be too stupid. The only variable was on Duque's side. If Duque couldn't hold on, then Lothar could only prepare early and kill as many as he could. Now that Duque's side was as relaxed as if he was on a field trip, Lothar was relieved. To reassure Lothar, Duque even showed Lothar the scene of the battle. Indeed, not many elves were injured or killed, and the dead side was all on the tribe's side. After turning off the magic transmission, Duque rubbed his eyebrows. Well, my Aurelia, you may soon have to test the endurance of you and your men. After all, our enemy is the most intelligent beast. It's not easy to be a good hunter. It's okay. I love this kind of challenging work. Aurelia was full of confidence. After all, Duque was trying to reassure Lothar. If the big boss of the tribe was really so brainless, the Alliance wouldn't have fought for so long and so badly. The enemy was Orgrim. After breaking through the 5th level, Orgrim touched his chin. Sebek, take 10,000 men and attack from the swamp. But, no buts. I suspect the swamp is fake. Sebek did as he was told. 20 minutes later, Sebek led 10,000 warriors to the north. But as soon as they approached the swamp, they ran into the impenetrable fog and the real swamp. Duque specially arranged for 2,000 city guards and 2 ranger squadrons to cover Marion's mages. They directly used thick fog and swamp, according to the direction of the tribe's attack. Unable to resist the magic of the alliance, the chief was very depressed. Then he immediately split the attacking tribe into 3 groups and attacked at the same time. In the end, they encountered a swarm of monsters and spirits. Chapter 453. To be honest, this was not the first time Orgrim had seen these things. It was these mechanical creations that he could not understand that had ruined many of the ancestral Gold's men. It had also turned a long-distance raid that could have been written into a textbook into a laughable empty run. The red lights that covered the mountains were eye-catching and blinding. It seemed meaningless, but it was a declaration of danger to every beast man. What should they do? Attack. These things are not dangerous. A centurion said. Based on past experience, this was indeed the case. These things that covered the mountains might be able to blast out hidden trolls, but they were not aggressive. Perhaps in the eyes of humans, these things were no different from the crude axes that the beast men made themselves. This centurion took the lead and rushed over first. He flew up and kicked the body of a squalling demon spirit. The Yao flew away like a broken ball. If it was in the past and his experience was correct, he would have no problem doing so. But now, bang! With a loud noise, the Yao exploded. The huge impact sent the centurion, who weighed more than 300 to 400 kilograms, flying into the air. Pieces of metal splattered all over his ugly face, and he was instantly blinded. What was more terrifying was that even though the armor blocked the fatal blow for him, the explosion still blew off one of his legs. A centurion who was not very famous in the Blackrock tribe was crippled just like that. At this moment, the Yao in front of them suddenly sped up and charged towards the Horde army. No. Stop them. How? Only now did the Horde realize that most of the trolls who were good at long-range attacks were already dead. If they had the guts, they might have been able to survive by throwing the only weapon in their hands. But if they were really close, the explosion was enough to break any beastman's arm or leg. Boom. Boom. Following the continuous explosions, the elven rangers on the other side started shooting arrows at the wooden wall again. Suicide bombing was an almost unsolvable problem even before Duque traveled to this world. To Duque, the only problem was that he had not found the remote detonation technology. These Yao that charged forward were all loaded with bombs, and Duque used the system to control the magician's hand to detonate them. Even so, it was enough to make Orgrim's scalp tingle. Attacking isn't. It wasn't like he didn't attack. The losses were already great. The tribe was not afraid of sacrifice, but what the tribe was most afraid of was this kind of fruitless cutting of flesh. 10,000 people had died in total. Apart from tearing down 6 of the Alliance's wooden walls, they didn't kill anyone else. Including the trolls' spears, the Alliance's casualties definitely did not exceed 300 people. The huge casualties caused the beastmen's hearts to waver. Orgrim's army was only left with 30,000 people. Now there were only 20,000 orcs left, and many of them had low morale. How were they supposed to fight? Duque, who was standing on top of the tower, was very patient. He had not made a move yet. Or rather, it was not yet time for him to act. The core elites of Orgrim did not move. Those 10,000 people were the last elites of the Blackrock tribe. These 10,000 people were not to be underestimated. The system elf gave Duque a rare hint. These guys actually had decent magic resistance. Not only was it resistant to fire, but it also seemed to have some resistance to ice and arcane spells. This covered most of the mainstream spells. What made Duque the most uncertain was Orgrim himself. Physical professions were different from magic professions. Mages were divided into 5 levels: Earth, Sky, Morning Star, Radiant Moon, and Breaking Dawn. Physical professions were very vague. They were generally divided into the domain of experts, powerhouses, and heroes. According to Aurelia, it seemed that people like her who entered the domain of heroes would awaken a certain trait. For example, she specialized in speed and agility, and then awakened the additional wind attribute at the storm altar. Orgrim. If he did not find an opportunity to force him to use his full strength, he would probably not know. Originally, Duque wanted to drag the tribe's elites to death. However, a line of system notifications shocked him. Pass the order. Let the Silver Hand fight. As the drawbridge was lowered, the huge east gate of Lordaeron that had been urgently repaired opened with a rumble. A cavalry of thousands rushed out of the gate and stopped less than a kilometer away from the rear of Orgrim's army. The radiance of the paladins could be clearly seen from afar. There were not many people in the Silver Hand. In fact, there was less than half a regiment here, only 60 people. Moreover, the most capable fighter, Uther, was not here. Only Tyrion Fordring and Gavin Rad, the two first-generation paladins, were leading the team. The holy light of the paladins blinded the eyes of the Horde scouts. The thousands of Alliance knights did not attack. They stood at the side and back of the Horde. After that guy ran to Orgrim's side to report, Orgrim's face immediately darkened. He immediately realized that this was Duque trying to persuade them to retreat. Great Chief, we can't retreat. If the humans really had that ability, they would have attacked long ago. Orgrim's deputy, Sabek, shouted. I know. Orgrim was very hesitant. Duque's tactical strategy was very clear. It was to kill as many of the Horde's elites as possible. Duque, who was not limited to one city or one place and only wanted to kill people, was now trying to persuade the Horde in the east to retreat. It was obvious that there was a problem in the alliance. Duque had to give up on completely annihilating the Horde's army in the east and focus on annihilating the Horde in the west. But what was the variable? Orgrim didn't know. Right now, he was extremely envious of the alliance's communication methods. This allowed the higher-ups to quickly grasp any changes in the situation. It was not like the Horde's outdated communication methods, where they had to personally send people to deliver orders. Now it was up to Orgrim to take the gamble. Even though Orgrim knew that the human cavalry at the back of his army was definitely not elite, he still couldn't ignore the existence of this army. If the Horde's numbers dropped to 10,000, the attack from the front and back a few days ago would definitely happen again. Damn it! The giant hammer of destruction smashed into the ground, creating a huge pit. At this moment, the Alliance suddenly counterattacked. With hundreds and thousands of flashing red demons as the lead, nearly 3,000 elven rangers came down from the wooden wall. Amidst the explosions, they slowly advanced while shooting arrows. Orgrim also found out that not every demon spirit would explode, but every one of these flashing red demons looked exactly the same. Orgrim suddenly did something that surprised all his guards. He actually rushed to the front of the formation. His loud roar pierced through the chaotic battlefield and reached the Alliance's formation. Duke Marcus, answer me. Are you colluding with Gul'dan? Chapter 454. The tribe's chief actually came to ask if the Alliance's deputy commander was colluding with the strongest warlock of the tribe? What the hell? Most of the orcs did not understand the common language, but the elves did. At that moment, the elves perked up their ears. Both sides had stopped fighting and pulled apart to listen to the conversation between the two leaders. The few orcs who knew the common language were ready to be translators. As a leader of the Alliance, Duque did not have to answer Orgrim's stupid question. But Duque did not dare to not answer. Colluding with the Horde was a major crime. Thinking about the fate that Alterac was about to face, King Eden would probably be cursed for all eternity even after his death. Duque used a voice amplification spell to answer. Colluded. The pitiful Orc King Orgrim. Don't you know that you are being used by Gul'dan? No, I should say, don't you know that our Alliance and your Horde are all victims of the Burning Legion's Demon Lord scheme? What? No wonder Orgrim was shocked. He really did not know Gul'dan's motives, or the source of his true power. The Lord of the Burning Legion, the evil god Sargeras, controlled our world's guardian Medivh. He colluded with your warlock, Gul'dan, who was seduced by the demon lord Kil'jaeden. That's how the Dark Portal came about, and how your Horde invaded the world of Azeroth. To put it bluntly, you orcs are just pathfinders for the demons to invade this world. No, that's because our world is on the brink of destruction. Orgrim argued. Yes, it's because of the power of the demons that brought your world to destruction. Duque did not hold back his sarcasm. Orgrim was shocked. He could not help but recall his late friend Durotan's complaint. I think it's Gul'dan and his warlocks who destroyed our world. You see, wherever they go, they use their dark powers. The land is drying up, the trees are withering, there's no grass, and there's no prey. Without prey, the orcs have no choice but to starve. He would never forget how many of his clansmen had been sacrificed on the way to the dark portal when his clan was migrating. Some were weak, some were sick, and some were severely injured by their prey. Once upon a time, the survival of the fittest rule of the orcs for thousands of years made him feel that this was only natural. Now that he thought about it, whether it was Durotan or Duque, what they said was undoubtedly true. When Orgrim first saw the dark portal, it was still a dirty swamp, but it was not lacking in life. But now, during the winter, he returned to the dark portal. That place had become a barren wasteland. Gray hills, crimson earth. There were no ordinary beasts, only monsters mutated by dark powers. Now that he thought about it, it should be the warlock's demonic power. Have you thought it through? You orcs are just a bunch of pitiful creatures being toyed with by the devil. All your glory is just a joke to embellish the devil's conspiracy. And the one who is playing with you is Gul'dan. Duque mercilessly spat out his poisonous tongue. Have you thought it through? Since you've thought it through, then scram. Orcs, go back to your world. Gul'dan. Orgrim waved his warhammer as he roared at the sky. I will use this to kill you. I will see you pay the price for your betrayal. When Orgrim shouted, there were a few in the alliance who thought that they would not have to fight in the future. They were too naive. However, the Horde has no other choice. We will punish the traitors. But the orcs must continue to multiply. So your world, we're definitely taking it. Duque's expression changed. Orgrim took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. I will lead my clan south. We will clear out the obstacles along the way, and make sure that the road is clear. Once we deal with Gul'dan, we will return. When that time comes, it will be the end of the alliance. While he doubted if his words would come true, and they were lucky to catch Lordaeron off guard this time, it would not happen a second time. But Orgrim had to say it. Even if they lost, they could not lose. They could not lose in terms of momentum. Since their goal was to destroy the other side, there was no need for peace, and there was no need to show weakness. Duque narrowed his eyes and said coldly, there is no need to wait for the future. Today, I want all of you to die here. Duque waved his hand. With the self-destructing demon spirit as the vanguard, the Alliance's army attacked again. But at this moment, the Horde had a clear goal, to break through. Even if Aurelia and the other rangers rained arrows on the Horde, and Marion and the other mages kept releasing magic attacks, the effect was limited. Every time they almost caught up to the Horde's formation, a small tribe would bring hundreds of people back and fight to the death. The Silver Hand led by Tyrion Fordring was, after all, only a group of city guards who could barely ride on horseback. They were trash in terms of combat power. After the Horde paid the price of 5,000 lives, Orgrim led his army back into the Alterac Mountains. Orgrim retreated, but Duque was not happy at all, because he knew what the Horde had sent to save them. On the western battlefield, the battle was still fierce. At this moment, Cudrin Wildhammer suddenly felt something flying towards him from the sky. He glanced at it and saw a black shadow flying down from the clouds above his head. At first, he thought that it was a warrior who came to report to him about the battle, but he immediately felt that the way this guy flew was not like a griffin. There were even more black shadows coming from the southeast. It seemed like they came from Lake Lordemir, and they were probably flying at a higher altitude than them. But what were those things? But as the black shadows approached at high speed, they became bigger and bigger, to the point that they covered his vision. In the name of AI Ruefeng, Cudrin muttered to himself. He was completely intimidated by the largest among them. It had a slender body, a long tail and neck, and huge wings that occasionally flapped and extended high into the sky. Only one flying creature could have such a huge body. As the last of the clouds dispersed, the sun shone on them. The creature's body shone with a red light, and was covered with dark red scales. Kudrin knew that his judgment was correct. It was a dragon. Kudrin's kill count had already reached double digits, but this one was completely different. Because if his eyes weren't playing tricks on him, this was an ancient colossal dragon whose size was comparable to the 5 great dragon kings. It was definitely over 10,000 years old. Chapter 455. What kind of joke was this? Even though Kudrin had killed so many red dragons controlled by the orcs, he never thought that he would have to face an opponent of this level one day. A young dragon under 1,000 years old could easily destroy a town. A young dragon under 10,000 years old could destroy a human army. But what about an ancient dragon that was more than 10,000 years old? The answer was enough to destroy a kingdom. This dragon was still far away, but it had already let out a loud roar. The surging sound waves caused the clouds to scatter, and the air around it to distort slightly. Its crimson-red wings spread out, and even the ground shook slightly. It was like a falling comet, heading straight for the Lordaeron soldiers who were blocking the horde's escape. Well, here's the problem. How could they stop an orc army that was charging at them at full speed? The answer was to form a solid infantry formation. How could they save more lives from the dragon breath of an ancient dragon? The answer was to disperse the formation and turn it into a formation of scattered soldiers. Mograine knew how to deal with any given situation. Unfortunately, even someone as brave and skilled as Alexandros Mograine was dumbfounded when he suddenly encountered such a situation. It was not that he did not receive an emergency magic message from Duque, but an army of 100,000 soldiers could not retreat at will. On the noisy battlefield, it would take more than 10 minutes for the message to reach the front lines. Most of the soldiers' first reaction when they were suddenly asked to disperse while they were fighting well was to refuse. The task of blocking the orc army's retreat and killing the most orcs was personally given by King Tyrrhenas. King Tyrrhenas hated the orcs who burned the entire Silverpine forest to the ground. Even though most of the burning was done by the flamethrowers of the FFF team, without the orcs, there was no need for such cruel weapons. Well, in the end, the orcs deserved to die. And as the core of the alliance, Lordaeron had to play a more important role, and not let Duque have all the glory. In the end, the first target of the dragon that came out of nowhere was Lordaeron's army. Even though Mograine had sounded the horn to disperse the battle, the dragon was still too fast. When the WYRM flew past at high speed, the wind pressure generated by the mere flapping of its wings was enough to create a terrifying storm in half of the Rotterdam Kingdom's army, causing everyone nearby to be blown off their feet and rolling on the ground like rolling gourds. The gigantic ballistae and catapults originally required 2 horses to pull and at least 10 engineers to operate. Now these huge war machines were like children's toys, falling apart with a single scratch from the dragon's claws. A catapult was caught in the air by the dragon's claws, and then thrown down wantonly. The wooden car disintegrated in mid-air, turning into countless pieces like scattered leaves in a storm. They smashed into the heads of the Lordaeron soldiers. All of a sudden, a ball of bluish-purple light that was not large but very eye-catching appeared in the sky above the Rotterdam Kingdom's army. It was the light of the portal opening, and an old mage with white hair and a white beard stepped out of the portal. In the next moment, he slowly descended and stood on a huge piece of ice that rose from the ground. In the Alliance, there were only 2 Pharaoh with such an aura. The one who was good at playing with ice was naturally the strongest mage in the Dalajan, Antonidas. The old mage held onto his icicle staff and shouted into the sky, his angry voice immediately echoing in the air through the magic amplification. Tyrannes, answer me. Why do you have to stoop so low as to serve these despicable green worms? Forgive me, Alexstrasza is in their hands. I had no choice. Tyrannes's vertical pupils showed clear sorrow. With that, the ancient WYRM Tyrannes spread its huge wings that had a wingspan of at least 30 to 40 meters, almost hovering in midair. A faint crimson light shone from its chest, spreading from its chest to its long neck. Then, a blazing dragon's breath came out of its mouth filled with sharp teeth. This dragon's breath was so huge that it felt like the whole sky had become a huge burning cloud, pressing heavily on the Scarlet Cross Army's heads. Almost at the same time, a huge ice tornado with a diameter of more than 100 meters rolled up without warning. The cold air quickly condensed into palm-sized icicles, mixed in with the tornado and rose into the sky, colliding with the dragon's breath that was like the flames of hell in the air. At that moment, the whole sky seemed to flash with a chaotic glow of white and red. The violent energy reaction stirred up a huge energy turbulence that completely enveloped the entire northern region of the battlefield. The thousands of people around Antonidas were instantly swept up by the terrible turbulence and died. This was not the end. The violent energy continued to spread in all directions. With the human and dragon as the center of the battle, time seemed to stop for a second, and then in the next second, time started to flow again. A powerful shockwave that could overturn everything standing within a kilometer began to sweep the entire battlefield. Well, a battle of hundreds of thousands of people had been messed up by these two guys who were completely cheating. This was not a battle of the same level at all. Mortals could not interfere in a battle of this level at all. At this moment, Duque arrived. "We're late." Aurelia bit her lip. "No, it's not too late. In fact, it's just in time." Duque handed an especially thick arrow to Aurelia and another to Sasha. "HM. Can you shoot these two arrows at Tyranni's eyelids?" "What's the use?" Aurelia expressed her doubt. "Even the eyes of a dragon have a membrane that's harder than steel. Even if our arrows hit it, we won't be able to hurt it." "I didn't say we're going to kill Tyrannis." In fact, the one who was more doubtful was Duque. But Duque would not dare say it even if he died. In history, Tyrannis should have died in the Dragonmaw clan's grim battle fortress because he was too weak. Why was Tyrannis still alive and kicking, running over to the tribe's rescue team? But he still had to do what he had to do. Duque could not sit back and watch as the Alliance's army was beaten like dogs. "Sasha, you go first." "Okay." The silver-haired Sasha knocked an arrow. Just like her sister, Sasha's posture when she pulled the bow also had a valiant and heroic air. The Creator had given the High Elves the most beautiful appearance, and the long years of battle had trained the Windrunner sisters' unparalleled heroic spirit on the battlefield. A strong wind blew, and Sasha's wind arrow flew out. The arrow's trajectory was so light, like a piece of cotton in the wind. Tyrannis, who was in a fierce battle, did not notice the arrow until it exploded less than half a meter away from his eyeball, releasing a blinding light. Flash grenade. Chapter 456. Any creature, as long as they weren't blind, would naturally close their eyes in the face of strong light. Tyrannis closed his eyes. Just for a moment. At the same time, Aurelia's double arrow arrived. Poof! With a muffled sound. The thing on the arrow exploded above the dragon's eyelid, and a layer of strange substance seemed to cover the dragon's eyelid. At this moment, Tyrannis suddenly shrank his neck. He didn't know what it was, but he instinctively felt that something was wrong. The ancient dragon's incomparable experience told him that touching this thing would cause him to lose a layer of skin, even if he didn't die. He flinched. Aurelia's mouth opened wide. She couldn't hide her surprise and regret. Her confident attack was actually dodged by Tyrannis with unparalleled reflexes. It was supposed to be like this. However, two hands of magic suddenly appeared above the two blobs of liquid that exploded. One beat. Smack. The two balls of liquid were slapped onto Tyrannis's eyelid at lightning speed. For an ancient colossal dragon, the long years had allowed him to train and evolve everything he had. The scales of young dragons were soft, and even the most ordinary human weapons could easily cause fatal damage to them. As time passed, the scales would become harder. After 1,000 years, the scales would become even harder than steel. Unless it was an epic weapon, it would be impossible to break through the tough scales of a dragon. Dragon skin was similar. The older a dragon was, the thicker and more resilient its skin was. This made dragons one of the most terrifying creatures on the planet. To be honest, mages below the level of Radiant Moon could barely cause any damage to an ancient dragon. In Duke's memory, All the bosses of the dragon race in the game had to have at least 25 companions like him who could not be killed before they could attempt to take down the boss. How to deal with an ancient dragon that was likely to go berserk became a difficult question. He couldn't beat it, but he couldn't drag it out either. The answer was revealed. It was glue. This was something Duque accidentally discovered when he went to Iron Stove Castle at the beginning of the year to inspect the creations of the gnomes who were courting death. The gnome named it BBBBB Super Glue. Of course, Duque didn't mind calling him BB Glue. It was actually a kind of glue that solidified instantly. Originally, the gnome was going to use it to repair the gnome aircraft, but because it solidified too quickly, it was rejected by all the gnome technicians. In the end, Duque only used 5 gold coins to buy a large barrel. Now it was time to use it on Telanes. Flash Grenade forced Telanes to close his eyes. Random BB glue could prevent the dragon from opening its eyes. Telanes had lived for tens of thousands of years and had never seen anything like this. For a moment, he thought he had gone blind. However, the rays of light that seeped through the gap in his eyelids told him that it was only his eyelids that were glued shut. "Help me." A magical message was sent to Antonidas, and the Kirin Tor Council immediately understood. Telanes stopped its dragon breath and tried to fly higher to avoid the possible attack. However, he did not notice that a huge ice ball was forming at high speed 100 meters above his head. Condense. Condense. Condense again. The heaven-defying effect of the Crown of Ice magic circuit was revealed at this moment. With the cooperation from the Alterac Palace, Antonidas and Duque's coordination was even more pure. Basically, he did the work, and Duque controlled it. Use the sonic arrow to disrupt the shooting. Duque shouted. In less than 2 seconds, 2 huge explosions exploded in Telanes' ears. Telanes' 5 senses were all messed up. Giant dragons were the true overlords of the sky. The sudden blindness would only affect the giant dragons temporarily. However, the wind-type sonic arrow that had been strengthened by the storm altar was different. The sudden explosion of the arrow not only disrupted Telanes' hearing, but it also made him unable to feel the flow of the wind. It could be said that at this moment, his sight, hearing, and senses were temporarily disabled. Without hesitation, the huge ice ball fell from the sky. With a powerful boom and an unparalleled momentum, as if it was a perfect trajectory that had been calculated thousands of times, the ice ball actually hit Telanes' skull right as he shook his head in pain. Bam! With a loud bang, the ancient dragon was smashed to the point of seeing stars. It fell. Get out of the way. The people and orcs below, as long as they could react, all revealed horrified expressions. The dragon fell. At that moment, it was as if there was a terrible earthquake near the point of impact. The ground, which was supposed to be extremely thick, was like a piece of rotten meat that had its bones pulled out. After a loud bang, a huge pit that was at least 10 meters deep was shoveled out by the tumbling dragon. The ground on both sides of the pit suddenly bulged, sending people and things flying into the sky. The surging shockwave spread in all directions, throwing more people into the air. Even Mograine himself was sent flying by the huge force along with his horse, and then fell heavily to the ground. The only fortunate thing was that he separated from his beloved horse in midair, which saved him from being crushed by the warhorse. Grom Hellscream, who was attacking fiercely at the front lines, was also hit. The place where Telanes fell was too unlucky. It happened to be aimed at him. As a result, the great hero of the tribe was sent tumbling backward like a rolling gourd, knocking over countless of his own people. He rolled for about 100 meters before he finally managed to stop the momentum of his backward motion. Telanes' fall caused the entire front line to fall into chaos. High Lord Mogaine's flag fell, and the High Lord himself temporarily lost contact. This caused the nobles at the back to panic, and the noble army they led was even more chaotic. Even though they were far away and received much less counterattacks, they still fell left and right, unable to form a proper formation. At this moment, the orcs exerted their strength. In a chaotic battle, the unique characteristics of the orcs' individual combat abilities were magnified almost limitlessly in such a situation. Many orcs did not even get up before attacking the humans with whatever weapons they had at hand. Hammers, daggers, or even fists and fangs. They could deal fatal blows to the humans who were physically weaker. Many of the human warriors were sent flying again before they could even stand up, falling heavily onto their own comrades. Loktar Ogre. The loud and clear slogan was answered by hundreds of people. Hundreds of people responded. Mograine had no choice but to blow the bugle and order his subordinates to form small defensive formations. The result was that the army barely managed to survive, but at least 30,000 orcs broke through the encirclement and entered the vast forest of Tirisful Forest. Tyrannes, who was temporarily blinded, struggled to fly away. Chapter 457. The defense of Lordaeron was over. It ended with the Alliance's victory. However, this was not a satisfactory result for either side. They did not win big when they should, and they did not lose when they should. Orgrim retreated back to the Alterac Mountains. It was obvious that he would choose to pass through Alterac and return to the hinterlands. He would then board the ship at the sea cliff and return to the southern continent to find Gul'dan. As for Grom and his Warsong tribe beastmen, their whereabouts were a mystery. Grom was no longer as aggressive as before. He purposely avoided all human towns and restrained his subordinates, hiding in the boundless forest. Everyone knew what kind of damage 30,000 beastmen could do. If left alone, they would be able to destroy the only core area of Lordaeron. It was not a good feeling to have enemies hiding right under their noses. King Tyrannes came to find Duque almost as soon as the battle ended. Please. We must not let these evil green-skinned beasts go. I need the support of the Elven Rangers, including Quell the Loss and your direct ranger. If possible, I hope you can personally lead the attack on this tribe. I'm sorry, but I have more important things to do. We must first send people to save the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza. Otherwise, when Tyrannes comes again, no one will be able to fight him. Your Majesty, that's a real ancient red dragon that can destroy a kingdom all by itself. Tyrannes was shocked. Didn't you and Sir Antonidas work together to defeat that giant lizard? No. He obviously held back. I can feel that he doesn't want to fight the Alliance. Antonidas' words helped Duque out of the situation. Duque suddenly said, Actually, I used Aurelia's Whisper of the Wind to tell Tyrannes that the Alliance will save the Red Dragon Queen as soon as possible. I hope he won't attack us with full force. What an explosive news. A real dragon. Noxus stroked his beard. In order to maintain morale and deceive the people, they could of course say that the Great Alliance hero Antonidas and Duke Marcus worked together to defeat the Red Dragon. But after hearing this inside story, every king and general's face darkened. That was an existence that violated the rules. It could render all strategies and tactics useless. In the face of this level of power, the battle between humans and beastmen was not even worth mentioning. Ever since Duque had crossed over to the world of Azeroth with the identity of a poor college student, he had been prepared to fight all kinds of unscientific non-human monsters in the future after he had gained a foothold. For example, dragons, elemental kings, ancient gods. Unfortunately, when it came down to it, Duque still felt that he was not ready. After all, in the game before he transmigrated, any giant dragon would be a proper game template. The problem was that he had transmigrated here alone. This was not like the game, where he could gather 25 companions who could revive infinitely and form a party to fight a boss. The only thing that could make Duque feel at ease was that he now had Aurelia and other strong people who had stepped into the realm of heroes to help him. Cudrin Wildhammer stroked his orange-red, well-combed beard. Actually, we can also think on the bright side. If we can really save Alexstrasza, maybe the Red Dragon army will side with the Alliance. After all, these big lizards were forced to fight with the Alliance before. King Salas sighed. The problem is that we don't even know where the Red Dragon Queen is. King Lang raised his hand. According to the intelligence of my subordinates, it is very likely that she is in the wetlands, in the dwarven fortress of Grim Battle. Duque had been hesitating about whether to reveal the truth. Seeing that the bandits from MI7 and Stormwind were so powerful, he was relieved. Salas was very excited. If they could deal with the Red Dragon Queen, the pressure on Torrential Fortress would definitely be greatly reduced. Really? Then can the Special Ops team from Stormwind? Lang smiled bitterly and shook his head. My people lack funds. They have already done their best to get this information. Then leave it to the elite secret forces of Lordaeron to handle this matter. King Terenas was full of confidence. Duque really did not want to hurt Terenas's confidence. Regardless of whether Terenas's bandits could deal with the mysterious demon soul. According to the original history, it was the famous Black Dragon King Neltharion, who was now known as Wings of Death, who had really tricked Alexstrasza into the hands of the Horde. Would Wings of Death let Terenas's silly bandits save the Red Dragon Queen before he achieved his goal? Duque could almost imagine the tragedy that would befall the elite bandits of Lordaeron. Unfortunately, he could not reveal the truth. After the leaders of the Alliance thought that they had settled the matter of the Red Dragon army, the meeting entered the main topic: how to wipe out the Horde. Under the premise that they were united against a common enemy, the meeting went very smoothly. There was no more wrangling and shoving like when the Alliance was first established. The main goal was as follows: push the front line to the Dwarven Kingdom of Cosmodan as soon as possible before winter, and rescue the besieged Ironstove Castle. At this moment, the hundreds of thousands of Alliance troops gathered in Lordaeron were divided into 3 fronts. Close to 200,000 Lordaeron troops, with the help of Kuel Salas and Duque's Elven Rangers, tried to wipe out the Horde that had escaped to the Tirisful Forest. Even if they could not wipe out all of them, they had to reduce the number of Horde in the area to an acceptable range. For example, below 3,000. Terenas planned to surround and annihilate these orcs with a large army and a high bounty. The second route was the Griffin Legion and the Wildhammer Dwarves Griffin Knights from the hinterlands. There was a total of 50,000 soldiers chasing after the remnants of Orgrim's army to ensure that they were eliminated, or at least to drive them out of Lordaeron permanently. This route was not difficult. Unless Orgrim gave up on killing Gul'dan, it was basically an armed parade to send the Horde out of the Lordaeron continent. The third route was the armies of the other countries. They would be led by Lothar back to the Wall of Thoradin, hoping to recover the fallen Earthy Highlands within 2 months, and drive the Horde back to the south bank of Soderbridge. After the meeting, Duque rubbed his eyebrows. The second battle of the Dark Portal was finally coming to an end. Back at the state guest house, Illyria massaged Duke's shoulders to relax. How did elves grow? Illyria's fingers didn't even have a callus after a long time of drawing a bow and knocking an arrow. Just as Duque was about to say something, a shocking news came. The Archbishop of the Holy Light, Alonsus Fail, was critically ill. Chapter 458. Alonso's Fail was a transcendent existence to the entire Alliance. As the national religion of the 7 kingdoms of the Alliance, he was definitely a great figure who could be on an equal footing with any king. At this time, the Alliance had just seen the light of victory and was about to launch a counterattack. However, the news of Archbishop Alonso's illness at this critical juncture cast a shadow over the Alliance's victory. It was a huge blow to Anduin, be it publicly or privately. Publicly, it was because Alonso's had promised that he would mobilize his believers to raise funds for the reconstruction of Stormwind after they reclaimed their territory in Stormwind. Once the most prestigious Alonso's died of illness, the revival of the Stormwind Kingdom would most likely be delayed for a very long time. Privately, Anduin and Alonso's had been friends for more than 20 years. Now that his old friend was critically ill, Anduin was naturally anxious. When Duque arrived, the kings who came to visit had already changed a few times. At this moment, there were only 2 high-ranking priests from the Church of Holy Light, Anduin, and Uther accompanying Alonso's. When Duque arrived with Gavinrad, he immediately discovered that the atmosphere was not normal. What's going on? Is it a disease or something? Duque did not believe that it was a disease. It was because the priests knew how to get rid of diseases and remove diseases. In this era, the most powerful doctors were the priests, not to mention Archbishop Alonso's Fail, who was at the top of all the priests. Secondly, there was the hospital bed. It was a very special hospital bed. Rather than calling it a hospital bed, it was more appropriate to call it a low-water tank. Because Alonso's was sleeping on it, most of his body was submerged in the sparkling holy water. Only his head was propped up against the pillow. Beside Alonso's, there was a priest who was continuously casting spells to dispel the filthy smell that flowed out of the archbishop's mouth and nose. Andoin leaned over and whispered to Duque. Alonso seemed to have touched the blood of the demon in the corpse of a tribal chief when he was studying the corpse. Then he might have triggered a curse in his body. He is now in a terrible state of continuous weakness. Seeing Duque enter, Alonso's opened his half-closed eyes. All of you leave. Only Uther and Duque will be here. Andoin wanted to say something but hesitated. In the end, he went out with the two high-ranking priests. Only Uther was left, purifying the air in the room with low-level dispelling diseases. Duque was a little hesitant. The historical Fail did not die so quickly. After winning the war against the Horde, Fail also raised a lot of money to build the Cathedral of Light in the rebuilt new Stormwind city. Hence, he became the Archbishop of both Lordaeron and Stormwind Kingdom. In order to commend his devotion to the Church of Holy Light and his contribution to the reconstruction of Stormwind, a statue of Alonsus Fail was erected in front of the Cathedral of Light. The inscription on the statue praised Fail's great contribution to the Alliance in the Second War, raising funds to help rebuild Stormwind City and Northshire Abbey. Fail did not die until the Third War of the Dark Portal, which was before the undead scourge invaded Lordaeron. The cause of his death was unknown. He had never heard of Fail dying. He thought of a very scary possibility. In the end he still asked, "Sir Fail, was it that day at the Storm Altar?" "That's right." If there was a variable related to Alonso's, it would be that day when Duque stole the fruits of Gul'dan's labor. He found this archbishop to help purify the storm altar that had been corroded by the demonic power. Alonso smiled. "My dear disciple, please swear in the name of the Holy Light that you will not tell anyone about what you saw and heard today." The muscles on Uther's firm and devout face twitched. "I swear in the name of the Holy Light." Alonso's then turned to look at Duque. "I will answer your question. Yes and no." "Yes, also no?" Duque was a little confused. "I have spent most of my life spreading the Holy Light, hoping that the Holy Light can drive away all darkness and evil. But I have discovered a fact. Whether the Holy Light drives away evil or darkness devours light, it is a relative process." "Relative?" "That's right. The more devout and pure the soul, the more holy light it produces. But only the side with the greater quantity and quality will be the victor of this battle. I did inhale too much demonic power that day. I thought I could purify it with my own power, but obviously I failed. But that's not important." "Not important." "Stop joking, Your Excellency. Alonso's reached out from the holy water and waved, stopping Duque from continuing. "I won't die so easily. As long as you send me back to the Holy Light Cathedral in Stratholme, I will be able to survive with the help of the holy water. At most, I will lose some vitality. This is not the time for me to sleep. The most important thing is you, Duque." "Me?" Duque was stunned. "Yes, you." Alonso's pointed at Duque's chest. "In this period of time, you have undoubtedly proven to everyone that you are the brightest star in the Alliance. Your wisdom and foresight almost make me suspect that you are a prophet sent by the creation titans." Fine, you are half right. But I am also most worried about you. Compared to your powerful magic power and wise mind, your will is too weak. If some evil existence wants to deal with you, you are the kind of person who is most vulnerable to corruption." Duque, who had been told the truth, felt like his face was on fire. Yes, he was just an ordinary university student before he transmigrated. Without experiencing the ups and downs of life, they lacked enough sharpening and life experiences. This was his biggest shortcoming, and it was a weakness that he could not solve at the moment. Therefore, Duque's fear spell was a sure hit. If not for the system elf, he would have died long ago. "I will be careful." No, it is not enough to just be careful. You need a firm belief. Otherwise, if you become the next Savis, that will be the Alliance's nightmare. Savis was once the leader of the High Elves, the core leader of the Kaldorei civilization in ancient Kalimdor. His status was second only to Queen Azhara. Afterwards, his soul was corrupted by the ancient god Inzos, which led to the first Burning Legion invasion in the world of Azeroth. Alonso's words were very heavy. What else could Duque say? He could only pinch his nose and accept it. He received a copy of the teachings of the Holy Light from the Archbishop. Before leaving, Alonso's grabbed Duque's hand and said solemnly, "Be careful of Gul'dan." Chapter 459. Be careful of Gul'dan? Duque couldn't believe Alonso's warning. If the history he was familiar with was right, Gul'dan was obsessed with something even more important. When Gul'dan was on Draenor, he was still a genius shaman. His master was recognized as the strongest shaman in many clans, the chief of the Shadowmoon clan, Nazul. But for greater power, he quickly abandoned his master and joined the Burning Legion's commander, Kil'jaeden. Now the reason he dared to abandon his clan and become a traitor was actually because of the same reason: power. When Gul'dan found out that Sargeras had been beaten into the abyss by Duque, Anduin, and Medivh, he was arrogant enough to think he could open the tomb of Sargeras, dig him out, and steal the power of a fallen titan who had killed many creation titans. According to the course of history, when he and his clansmen opened the door to the dungeon where Sargeras' tomb rose from the bottom of the sea, Gul'dan found only crazy demons waiting for him. In the end, Gul'dan would pay the price for his greed. He was torn to pieces by the crazy demons he released. In the beginning, Duque was still worried that Gul'dan would target him and give him a cursing look. But now, in Duque's eyes, Gul'dan was a little prince who was courting death. It was enough to remove him from the list of threats. Duque was wrong, very wrong. After Aurelia and Sylvanas left, Duque had nothing to do. Leaving the army wasn't as simple as being a ranger. With their bows and arrows, the rangers could go on a march as they pleased. As experts in surviving in the wild, as long as there was a forest, these rangers would not starve to death. But Duque's army couldn't. Ever since they left Hillsbrad and entered the hinterlands, the Griffin Legion had been fighting for thousands of miles without a good rest. Broken armor, medicine, and treatment of the wounded were all paid for by the Lordaeron Legion. And when they left the human settlements and entered the forest, they also had to prepare large amounts of rations. Reginald, the future Grand Marshal, would naturally be the one to do it. Duque was sleeping. Then Duque was shot. Duque rarely dreamed, but when he did, Duque's dreams were often more realistic than most people's. Other people's dreams were often fragmented, with all kinds of absurd scenes and no sound. Duque's dream was different. Not only did it have sounds and images, but it also had a complete plot. Now what Duque saw was the following magical scene. This was a night sky that was completely different from that of Earth. The entire universe was like an incomparably huge chaotic sphere, firmly covering the Azeroth. In his field of vision, there was nothing but pitch-black chaos. The dark chaotic clouds kept rolling, and from time to time, a long comet with a green tail would break through the thick clouds and descend to the ground. Duque stood on the scorched ground and stared at the night sky, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, a strange sound came from the sky. It sounded like a heavy bomber flying over his head, letting out an ear-piercing screech that came closer and closer. It was as if a mysterious force was pulling the scene from a landscape film to a war film. The sound quickly turned into a shrill sound that shook the eardrums and made them bleed and deaf. Duque only saw a huge meteor burning with pale green flames descending from the sky, piercing through his left vision, and out of his right vision in the blink of an eye, falling straight into the crystal forest. What the F***ck? Duque only had time to groan in dissatisfaction before the chaotic turbulence with countless sharp rocks and debris hit Duque's face, throwing him to the ground. The sound of the meteorite hitting the ground was endless, and the rising dust covered almost his entire field of vision. Duque raised his head and supported his hands. When he crawled up from the ground, he felt a burning pain on his face. He touched it with his hand, and the pain went deep into his heart. F***ck. Such a deep wound, and so much blood, I'm disfigured. A series of heavy footsteps that shook the earth came, attracting all of Duque's attention. A huge stone giant whose body was burning with green flame stood proudly less than 2 meters in front of Duque. Duque looked up blankly and saw the emotionless inorganic eyes on the skeletal head of the giant. To be precise, it was not a pair of eyes, but more like a gathering point of some kind of energy. It was evil and exuded a cold light that did not match its high body temperature. Not only the eyes, but all the places that were not covered by the skull were burning with green flames. Hellfire. It was a terrifying war machine. Ordinary people without special abilities would die if they were to fight it. It was more than 3 stories tall. And just standing there was a sense of oppression. Bang bang bang. There was another loud sound, and Duque's body was surrounded by hellfire. That kind of earth-shattering pressure, that kind of blazing heat that made it hard to breathe just by standing nearby, that kind of invisible spiritual pressure, caused Duke's expression to change greatly. He did not know how the hellfire came about, he only knew that his life was in danger. Human, kneel. Kneel to the Burning Legion's master. Otherwise, I will let your soul suffer under the eternal flames for eternity. Kneel. Burning Legion's master? Isn't that the Sargeras that I put down? The trace of fear in Duque's heart suddenly disappeared with this line that sounded so funny to Duque. Ha ha. I'm dying of laughter. Your boss will kneel when he sees me. Just you? Duque stood up proudly, his eyes filled with clear disdain. Yes. That was contempt. The contempt that a higher being had for a lower being. A second later, Duque made his move. No one knew how Duque did it. Very suddenly, 2 40-meter-long golden battleship blades appeared in Duque's hands. Oh la la la, eat my meteor blast slash. Duque shouted the name of the unknown move. A circle of light that was even brighter than the flames flashed. Hundreds of hellfire were kicked over like building blocks, exploding and disappearing. Duque laughed coldly. Your so-called terror can only scare ignorant dogs. Sorry, it won't work on me. In front of Duque, a shadow was slowly condensing into a shape, quietly wriggling. Very quickly, it became a guy that Duque was familiar with, the tribe's demigod warlock Gul'dan. He had a hunched back, and his coarse mouth was open, revealing a mouthful of smelly fangs. Whoosh. Duke Marcus, you really are an interesting human. Since I can't corrode and control you mentally, don't blame me. Oh, strictly speaking, I didn't do it. I just activated a small backdoor that Sargeras left in your body. The next moment, Duque suddenly woke up from his dream. He saw Gavin Rad rushing into his room with a face full of panic, and Vanessa pulling out the dagger from her thigh. Then, Duque slowly froze himself in front of them. His fingers were frozen, his breath froze, and his hair started to turn white. Chapter 460. Duque suddenly remembered what was going on. He'd always thought that as long as he didn't fight directly, a super boss like Gul'dan wouldn't notice him. Actually, Duque had definitely taken it for granted. He wasn't a nobody. He'd become a deputy commander of the Alliance, and had so many outstanding achievements. There was no way Gul'dan hadn't heard of him. It wasn't like Duque didn't know that Gul'dan had tried to enter a dream to steal Mediva's power, and pry into Mediva's knowledge. Coincidentally, Gul'dan had been stabbed by Duque at that time. Gul'dan, who was in the mental link, had fallen into a coma, causing the Shadow Council to be raided by Orgrim. But humans were like this. They always had some wishful thinking. Now Duque had paid a terrible price for this wishful thinking. Curse. Yes, it was the gift that Sargeras had left for Duque before he'd been sent into the abyss. At that time, this curse had been split into 3 parts. The biggest part had been taken by Alan, and the result was that it had turned to dust. About a third had been taken by Anduin Lothar. Duke's injuries were probably less than 1/10 of the total. The effect had indeed been split, but Duque had forgotten that he was the main target of the curse. The curse hadn't actually been removed. It was only because he hadn't injected any more power to continue the curse that it seemed to be ineffective. Duque really hadn't expected that Gul'dan would trigger this thing when he'd failed to forcibly control his soul in the dream. He'd screwed him over. At that moment on the ship, Gul'dan opened his eyes. What an interesting fellow. Is he really only 16? He actually resisted my mental intimidation. The two-headed ogre hero Google touched his head with both hands at the same time. Apart from that, Mediv, there's actually a human who can resist your mental attack? Gul'dan stroked his short beard. No, I haven't done anything to this Duque. It's not that I can't, but that I'm not in the mood. In my opinion, to corrupt this kid's mind and control him, it would only take a little time. Of course, I can also destroy his soul. If I do that, Orgrim might benefit from it. Then why do you want to kill him now? Gul'dan was furious. The stupid alliance actually let Orgrim's main force escape. If I don't control Duque and use the alliance to weaken the horde, Orgrim might catch up to me and disrupt my plan. I have people from 2 clans here, so I can't walk fast at all. It's a pity that the control failed. Otherwise, I'd have plenty of time to explore Sardra's tomb. In reality, Duque also realized that Gul'dan probably wanted to use brute force to subdue him, and then control his soul, turning him into a puppet. With a vice-commander of the Alliance as a puppet, whether it was to plot against Orgrim or for Gul'dan to rule the world in the future, it would be very convenient. But Gul'dan didn't expect Duque to resist his soul pressure. In reality, when breaking through the nightmare realm he had created, Gul'dan had suffered some damage to his soul. Otherwise, why would Gul'dan be so embarrassed and angry that he triggered the curse to kill Duque? No matter what, Duque was in trouble. After coming to this world, Duque had been training his body. But now, a single curse had caused Duque to become extremely weak. No. Duque screamed in his heart, but his mouth couldn't make a sound. This wasn't the ending he wanted. Through a series of struggles, his career was already on the right track, and he had reached a high position in the Alliance. After experiencing the cruel second battle at the Dark Portal, his influence in the Alliance would reach its peak. Cultivating a godly technique, letting his name resound in heaven and hell, marrying a rich and beautiful woman, reaching the peak of life. This was the ending that a transmigrator should have. But what the hell was this? That curse was madly absorbing his life force again. No, I can't die here. Duque tried to use his magic such as Ice Barrier, to use the absolute ice element to dispel all negative effects. But he couldn't activate the instant magic that he had tried thousands of times. Not only that, he couldn't contact the system elf either. Duque tried to do anything but failed. Only his eyeballs could move. Yes, he was paralyzed. Both his body and soul were like this. He faintly knew that this was the soul attack that Gul'dan had given him before dispelling the dream realm. Now Duque's mind became even more blank. He could only watch as Vanessa screamed in shock and approached him, while Gavin Rad reached out his large hand to touch his face. This first contact allowed him to feel something for the first time since he was paralyzed. Gavin Rad's hand was filled with holy light, but the places he touched felt like they were being burned by fire. It was painful, so painful that his brain felt like it was melting. In his daze, Duque only felt that a deep wound had appeared on his face. Exorcism. Gavin Rad let out a thunderous roar. Duque seemed to have woken up. He subconsciously raised his hand to touch his face, only to find that there was no wound at all. Did you hear what I said? Duque, don't move, and focus on receiving my holy light. Gavin Rad turned and glanced at Wuxia, who had rushed out of the room next door, and shouted, "Inform Weather immediately. It's best if you call Antonidas too." Duque opened his heart, allowing the sea of holy light to rush into his body and soul. Whoosh, 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 inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale again, and exhale again. Originally, the beating of the heart and breathing of the lungs were absolutely normal things for a living person, but for Duque, they had become movements that he had to use his own will to forcibly command his body to do. Moreover, every movement was accompanied by pain. Beads of sweat the size of soybeans emerged from Duque's forehead, and all the pores on his body, rolling down. Vanessa, who was waiting on him at the side, could not get close to him no matter how agile she was. The intelligent Wuxia was the first to inform Antonidas. This top human mage had rushed over quickly, and even brought Weather with him through a teleportation door. Fortunately, Duque had taken Gavin Rad as his bodyguard, and fortunately, a few key figures in the alliance were free, so Duque's condition quickly stabilized. After a consultation with a group of big shots other than Alonso's, they came to a shocking conclusion. If left alone, Duque's life force would be depleted within a month, and he would die of exhaustion. Chapter 461. Duque might die. The alliance had been in shock for the past few days. Alonso's Fail's illness had only surprised the higher-ups of the alliance. After all, the Church of Holy Light's influence was only in Rotterdam and Stormwind. There were Church of Holy Light preaching in other countries, but most of them were non-believers. When the kings heard about Alonso's, they only said, "I'm sorry to hear this." But Duque was different. Other than King Eden of Alterac, who had already passed away, almost every king knew how to use his troops. They were very clear that compared to the upright and courageous Anduin Lothar, who was more straightforward, Duque was the glue and command tower that united the various countries of the alliance. Terina's Lord Aaron was the target of public criticism. Everyone knew that Terina's motives were not pure. No, it should be said that Terina's wanted to use this opportunity to become the second emperor of Sorodin. Everyone knew that. If they sent too few troops, it would be Rotterdam's fault. If they sent too many troops and money, they would have to worry about whether it was Rotterdam's conspiracy. At the very least, it would be a form of charity. No kingdom would feel comfortable. With Duque around, the kings were much more at ease. The troops, manpower, and resources that needed to be sent were definitely sufficient and on time. And everyone could see that Duque's insistence on killing was the key to the alliance's strength. If Anduin was the spiritual leader of the alliance, then Duque would be the brains of the alliance, second only to Anduin. Now, just as the alliance was about to turn to the counterattack phase, there was suddenly news of Duque's illness. The kings were really anxious. Visiting the Archbishop of Holy Light was a matter of the leaders of the various countries rushing to express their condolences. But what about Duque? A state guest house almost turned into a throne conference. In the end, they had no choice but to move Duque to the Rotterdam Palace. Otherwise, how would it look if 6 or 7 kings surrounded a small state guest house? Even so, even King Dalen Proudmoore, who was in charge of the navy, had rushed over on a griffin. It was clear how important Duque was. To everyone's surprise, they saw a different Duque, but not a dying Duque. His short hair was slightly gray, as if it was dyed, and there was a small tuft of silver in front of his forehead. Apart from that, there was nothing else. It didn't seem like a big deal, but Antonidas, who was the most authoritative expert on curses, told all the kings that it wasn't that simple. Right now, Duque is like a bucket with many holes. His life force is draining away with every passing moment. In 10 days, you will see a 30-year-old Duque. 20 days later, he would be 40. 1 month later, he won't be 50 years old, but dead. Is there no way to plug the holes or something? King Lang was the most nervous. For the others, losing a Duque was the same as losing a commander of the alliance. The main force of the tribe had been almost wiped out. As long as one wasn't too stupid, they could win the next battle. The only difference was how many lives were lost and how much time was spent. But for Stormwind, it was very likely that they would lose the most important cornerstone of the kingdom for the next 30 years, the pillar of the country. Antonidas shook his head regretfully. A single curse is like a ball of string wrapped around a string. No matter how messy it is, it can be taken out along the string. But Duque's situation is like a ball of string of the same color rolled together. I can't find a clue at all. This is a hole in the soul created by different methods from many worlds. I can't do anything about it. Most importantly, this is a curse cast by a demigod mage. Could a mere Breaking Dawn mage deal with the work of a world guardian? Be it Lang or Anduin, their mouths were filled with bitterness. They didn't expect that after going 1 round, it was still the fault of their dead old friend, Medivh. This was the greatest irony in the world. The temperature in the air gradually dropped. The atmosphere lingering in the air was the same. Almost everyone felt as if they couldn't breathe. That hateful ghoul Dan. Anduin gritted his teeth and punched the wall. At this time it was Duque who spoke. Actually, the situation might not be as serious as you think it is. Not serious? Then what is serious? King Lang's eyes were red, and even his voice sounded like he was about to cry. Lang didn't cry when he lost the land passed down by his ancestors. Lang didn't cry when Stormwind City, which symbolized the sovereignty of the entire kingdom, fell. Now that Duke was in critical condition, Ryan was crying. From the beginning, his eyes were red to the end, and it only took 2 seconds for him to cry. Rascal, you're about to die. I originally wanted you to help William, and let him restore the glory of Stormwind. I originally thought that if it didn't work out, I would let you. Before he could finish his sentence, Anduin patted Lang's shoulder and stopped him. Listen to Duque first. Duque heaved a sigh of relief. I guess the power of the mortal world can't do anything about this. When Duque said this, the king's heart sank. Fortunately, I still have one last hope, the Red Dragon Queen. Alexstrasza. Antonida's slightly cloudy eyes suddenly lit up. Yes. Why didn't I think of her? There's hope for Duque. Oh, at least there's hope. What? What? The kings immediately perked up. Not every king was so knowledgeable. They might have received good education from a young age, but most of it was about governing a country, martial arts, and the cultivation of a knight. Only a knowledgeable old mage like Antonidas could possibly know about this. After Antonida's explanation, the kings then realized that Alexstrasza was actually so powerful. In the Battle of the Ancient Times, in order to prevent Sargeras from entering this world through the portal of the Well of Eternity, the spell whirlpool created by the High Elves in the Well of Eternity exploded. The collapse of the Well of Eternity caused a strong earthquake. This earthquake destroyed the skeleton of the world. Nearly 80% of the land of the Azeroth continent was torn apart, leaving only a few fragmented continents around the newly formed ocean. The giver of life, the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, cast a magic acorn in the center of the Well of Eternity. The acorn began to sprout once it came into contact with the lake full of magic power, and grew into a huge oak tree. The roots of the tree went deep into the lake, and the huge canopy almost covered the entire sky. This huge oak tree was the eternal symbol of the harmonious relationship between the night elves and nature. The life energy it emitted could slowly spread and heal the wounds of the entire world. The night elves named their world tree Nordrassil, which meant crown of the sky, in the night elves' language. Chapter 462. Since the Red Dragon Queen could even create the world tree, it would be a piece of cake for her to solve a small curse. Duque can be saved. No one said it out loud, but that was what everyone thought. Tyreenas even hinted to Lang with a smile that if his people saved the Red Dragon Queen this time, Lang and Duque would owe Lordaeron a huge favor. This was obviously taking advantage of the situation. Using saving the Red Dragon Queen as a bargaining chip to force the recovered Duque to join Lordaeron was a despicable move. If Lang was a ruthless person, he would definitely not let anyone else get the Red Dragon Queen if he couldn't get it himself. Lang was a merciful king. When Tyreenas made this request, he wasn't thinking about Duque's usefulness, but what Duque had done for Stormwind and the royal family of Rin. Lang gritted his teeth and said, "As long as your people save Alexstrasza and let her save Duque's life, and Duque is willing to pledge his loyalty to you, I won't object to his transfer. However, Duque is a real talent. I hope that Duque can at least get the status of a Grand Duke in Lordaeron. Also, no matter what, Karazhan is a territory that I personally gave to Duque. I will never take it back." Tyreenas was overjoyed. He had only wanted to save the Red Dragon Queen, but he didn't expect to get the chance to buy one and get one free. Think about it. The Red Dragon army was willing to submit themselves to the filthy beastmen and become their mounts for their queen. If Lordaeron saved the Red Dragon Queen, wouldn't they at least be able to form an army of dragon knights? Coupled with the magic books that Duque and Duque had in the Karazhan Grand Library, one could imagine that in less than 10 years, Lordaeron would become the most powerful and overwhelming country in the entire Eastern Kingdom. Perhaps without the need for war, they could borrow the name of the alliance to annex the various countries and complete Thoradin the Great's No, even greater than Thoradin the Great's. That was because the alliance included 2 dwarf kingdoms and 1 high elf kingdom. While King Tyrrhena's was making his plans, Duke was making all sorts of arrangements as if he was making arrangements for his death. He had gathered almost everyone around him. First, he had Lang issue an official king's decree, announcing that Duke Fairville of the Bloodsail Pirates had officially become the Duke of Stormwind. He also had the various kings sign the decree in secret, confirming that the Bloodsail Pirates had committed crimes against the Alliance. As a price, all the fleets belonging to Stormwind would be under the command of King Dallin until the war with the orcs officially ended. Even if they were all used as cannon fodder, they would have no regrets. In fact, everyone knew that Dallin would not go to such extremes. Then, just in case, Duque had Duke Bearov transfer the deed of Southshore to Elugia, and registered Elugia as the Countess of Stormwind. This was to leave a way out for the Bearov family. Elugia's 2 younger brothers were still missing, but this could become the Bearov family's biggest weakness. The alliance still needed Alterac. Alterac's soldiers had fought bravely to clear the name of their country, but what about after the war? Elugia glanced at Duke many times, her eyes red and swollen. In the end, all the words she wanted to say turned into a deep bow. No one knew what decision this seemingly weak lady of the Bearov family had made. Finally, Duque gave Lang and Anduin the arrangements for the Western Wilderness, as well as the contact information of the Nagas and the Murlocs. The Windrunner yearns for freedom. If I am not here, they will not serve Stormwind. Whatever happens, let them be, Duque said to Lang. No, Duque, you will not die. King Tyrrhena's promised me that his team of spies will definitely rescue Alexstrasza. Duque did not answer immediately, but asked, what deal did you make with that old man Tyrrhena's? Do you think that if he can save my life, you will agree to let me go to Rotterdam? Lang was not a good liar, and he admitted it as soon as Duque pressed him. Sorry, I think this is the best for you. Your Majesty. Call me Lang, King Lang insisted. All right, Lang, I will tell you in private. Even if I die, I will not go to Rotterdam. I don't know why, but I hate Tyrrhena's. I have no interest in serving Arthas. Duque shrugged. It's that simple. Lang was speechless. Anduin was speechless. Duque clapped his hands. All right, if there is anyone in this world who can save Alexstrasza, it will not be Tyrrhena's. Because this is the domain of the dragons, and also the domain of mystery. Anduin suddenly thought of something. Then why Antonidas? Anduin shook his head at Lang again. Antonidas had to be responsible for the entire Dalagen. He would not risk his life for a foreign duke. At this time, Duque looked calm. But Sasha could not take it anymore. Duque, since the people from Rotterdam are not reliable, we should think of a way to get eldest sister and second sister back, and then we will go in by ourselves. We will go to Kudrin, he will definitely agree. What Sasha said was coincidentally Duque's current predicament. Previously, he had agreed to send Windrunner to help Rotterdam to eliminate the Warsong clan of Grom. In the end, the most reliable Aurelia, Sylvanas, and Lilith were seconded. Because they had to carry out a high-speed battle in the forest, Aurelia and the others did not bring the troublesome mages. In the end, they could not find Aurelia when they needed help at the crucial moment. They had just entered the Tirisful woodlands 2 days ago, and had promised to contact each other once a week. If they waited until they returned, they would probably only be able to collect Duque's corpse. Now out of the 6 great rangers, only Sasha was left by Duque's side. Duque could not help but feel that the goddess of fate had ill intentions. It was not the first time that Duque recalled the process of the Red Dragon Queen's rescue. In the past, when he understood this epic story, he would always feel fascinated. He could not help but wonder what he would do if he were to participate in this grand history. Could he be like the main characters of this branch story, using all kinds of great powers to create such a miracle? But when he really had to participate in this plot, he felt a little hesitant. He suddenly smiled bitterly. So, I still have not let go of life and death moral integrity. Chapter 463. Once upon a time, Duque had forgotten the fear of death and the uneasiness brought about by the decay of his soul. Looking at the notification on his retina, Duque was still a little confused. Serious warning, host, your Sargera's curse of resentment is active. You will lose your life force at the rate of 1 year per day. This effect has an unknown irreversible status. If you cannot lift the curse, you will die completely after 31 days and 22 hours, unable to be resurrected. Host, your soul power is also losing 10 points per day. It is estimated that it will be gone in 5 days. The soul power he had inherited from Mediv was 385, and his humanity was 230%. This was more than enough. But if he was dead and couldn't be resurrected, there was no point in having any moral integrity left. In the end, he still had to save the Red Dragon Queen as soon as possible. Faced with this situation, Duque was also in a state of panic. The Red Dragon Queen in the history was indeed saved, but that was after the Alliance had dealt with the main Horde forces and entered the mopping up period. At that point in time, most of the Alliance's fallen areas had been recovered, especially the dwarf fortress Grim Battle where Alexstrasza was imprisoned. Although the fortress was still under the control of the Dragonmaw clan, most of the wetlands had been recovered. In that terrible swamp, not only were there beastmen, but there were also all kinds of human liberators. For example, the Silver Hand from Lordaeron, and the dwarves from Iron Furnace Castle. Of course, most of them were the Wormhammer Dwarf Griffin Knights from Eagle's Nest Mountain. And now, that place wasn't even the front line. It was definitely the enemy's rear. What did the enemy's rear mean? It meant that there was still the entire Earthy Highlands, where more than 200,000 beastmen were stationed. To go in and save the Red Dragon Queen would be more than 10 times more difficult. Duke had just caused the entire Dragon Riders to fall from the sky above the Alterac Palace. During the battle, he didn't see the chief of the Dragonmaw clan, Zuluhid. Needless to say, he must have run back to Grim Battle to urge the Red Dragon Queen to give birth soon. It was not appropriate to say that he wanted to have a son soon. In order to meet the needs of war, the beastmen needed a large number of wyverns as mounts. Unfortunately, while the Creation Titans bestowed the WYRMS with unparalleled powerful bodies, they also weakened their fertility. In fact, the number of true descendants of giant dragons was so few that it made one's hair stand on end. In history, the red dragons that were used as mounts by the beastmen during the later stages of the war were actually the unfertilized eggs of other female giant dragons. Well, it was similar to the monthly ovulation of human females. However, Alexstrasza was forced to use magic to catalyze these unfertilized eggs into fighting wyverns. Due to their congenital defects, these red dragons could never grow into young dragons that were more than 1,000 years old. For the tribe, this was not important at all. It didn't matter if it was a genetic defect or a magical creation. As long as it could be ridden, it could deal with griffins in the air, and it could cleanse the ground with dragon breath. That was enough. Now, if Duque asked Kudrin to lead the Griffin Knights there, Kudrin would definitely agree with his character. But Duque could not cheat him. The dwarves were the humans' good brothers, and if they were to be wiped out like this, Duque would feel bad. After Duque and Sasha analyzed the situation, not only Sasha, but even Lang and the others' eyes dimmed. To be honest, Duque felt a little helpless. It felt like the more he changed the course of the world, the more he was destined to go against the will of the world, or the amazing ability of the River of Fate to correct things. He had a bad feeling that he was doomed to fail. However, when Duke looked around and saw Ryan, who was still alive and kicking, the Windstalker's third sister, Windstalker Sasha, who was wearing the emblem of the Stormwind Kingdom, and Gavin Rad and Alicia, who should have died tragically, were present, Duke could feel a faint sense of warmth. It was as if they were constantly reminding Duque that everything he did was worth it. Duque sighed. Tomorrow. If I don't hear from Aurelia and the others by tomorrow, I'll set off immediately. And please, even if you have to imprison Aurelia, don't let her catch up. I'm afraid she'll do something stupid. No, Duque, you don't understand, big sis. She'll definitely catch up. Then tell her that I have a 60% chance of coming back alive, Duque said decisively. 60%? That high? It wasn't just Sasha. Almost everyone present was stunned. From how they saw it, no matter who Duque brought with him this time, they would definitely die if they went deep into the enemy's territory. Who knew that Duque would say that he had a 60% chance? I know that this is a huge crisis for both me and the Alliance. But I can still use my magic. Through a history book I read in Karazhan, I know what imprisoned Alexstrasza. The most important thing is that I know how to solve this matter. This is something none of you have. The only problem is that I need to leave the Alliance's command for a long time. Andoin patted his chest and promised, "That's easy. Leave the military matters to me. I'll try my best to put pressure on the Horde and attract their attention." Lang continued, "I'll give you all the manpower that MI7 can deploy." Duque shook his head. "I don't need bandits." Almost as soon as he said that, the light in Vanessa's eyes dimmed. Duque smiled. "I promised your father that I'd take good care of you. If your father returns with success only to find that his daughter died because of an even riskier mission, I won't be able to rest easy even if I die." Vanessa didn't say anything. Duque continued, "This time I've thought about it. I only need a few people to follow me." Andoin nervously took out a small notebook and prepared to record. "The ones going with me are Gavinrad and Windsor." Gavinrad's eyes lit up when he heard that, and his face was filled with determination. Windsor, who had been entrusted with an important task for the first time, looked more eager. It wasn't her first time fighting, but it was the first time that she had to leave her two sisters to carry out such an important mission. The third name that Duque said made everyone confused. "I also want to find a young earth mage in the Dalajan called Ronan. I think he'll bring me luck." If Duque hadn't lost his ability to cast spells, Duque himself would be strong enough. Why would he choose an earth mage as his follower? Alright. The mysterious Duque was as puzzling as ever. Chapter 464. The Rapidstream Castle had almost fallen. Only one city was needed for the Horde's flag to be placed on top of the Rapidstream Castle's palace. But the 2 or 3 seemingly narrow city districts in front of the palace had become a meat grinder for both the Alliance and the Horde. There was no such thing as a front, and the humans were playing hide and seek. They could pop their heads out of the rubble of any ruins, or even shoot an arrow straight at the orc's head without popping their heads out. It was not until the Horde broke through the outer walls of the Rapidstream Castle and entered the city district that they were shocked to find that the entire mountain under the ancient capital of Thoradin the Great was almost hollowed out. Under the walls of the Rapidstream Castle, there were tunnels that looked like spider webs. Many of the tunnel entrances were quite narrow, which the burly orcs could not enter at all. As a result, whenever the orcs attempted to storm the inner city, the road from the outer city to the inner city would be constantly harassed and attacked. The orcs could not transport any heavy siege weapons. Perhaps a bag of kerosene would be thrown out of nowhere and burn the catapults and siege vehicles to ashes. On the 5th day after Orgrim evacuated from Lordaeron, Ren Blackhand, who was in charge of attacking the Rapidstream Castle, received an order. This order from the Great Chief made Ren Blackhand very unhappy, but he had to carry it out. Since it is an order from Zulud, let Zulud take care of things here. He received a reply. An hour later, the Rapidstream Castle welcomed its destruction. The wind pressure generated by the flapping of the red dragon's wings caused further damage to the ancient capital that had been half destroyed for more than 2,000 years. The terrible storm caused by the flapping of the dragon's wings easily blew down all the buildings that were still relatively intact. The slightly older buildings were directly uprooted, and the loose walls made of mud bricks were blown into the air and disintegrated. In front of the palace, the defensive zone that had troubled the orc army for months was like a sandcastle that had been washed away by the waves. It was flattened in a few short breaths. "Forgive me." The dragon's deep voice of repentance came from the sky in the common language. Along with this voice, Tirani's abdomen bulged, then its chest and finally its neck. Dense golden flame patterns formed by the draconic language appeared in the air in front of the giant dragon. For a moment, this light even surpassed the light of the sun. A destructive flame quickly expanded from that small cluster into a huge fireball that was even bigger than the entire house. The golden light completely shrouded the entire royal palace of Torrent Fort. The grayish-black palace was doused with lava-like flames. In the screams of every Riptide Castle resident who witnessed this scene, the palace melted. The huge bluestone was like a piece of cheese that was melted by the high temperature. It began to flatten, and a blazing unknown substance spread in all directions. The symbol of Riptide Castle was gone? The ancient capital of the Arazuo Empire, which had been passed down for over 2,000 years, was gone just like that. Talanistas looked a little weak, but the orc on his back roared loudly. The pitiful ancient dragon had no choice but to pull himself together. He aimed at a huge cave, and spat out what was left of his dragon breath. It was as if a terrible volcano had erupted in the underground pit. The narrow tunnels that restricted the orcs from entering became the graves of the humans. The doors and boulders that restricted the entry of enemies collapsed like dominoes. Not only Tyrannies, but the other red dragons also followed the orcs' orders and quickly found a deep pit, spitting their dragon breaths into it. This situation was a bit like a syringe. With enough pressure from one side, the flames spread along the tunnel to all the space in the mountain. King Salas Trollbane, who had just arrived at the wall of Saladin, fell to his knees. It wasn't just him. Every Stromgarde warrior saw the golden flames shooting out from the ventilation holes on the cliff of the mountain where Riptide Castle stood. How many of the people inside could survive? Was it a slim chance of survival? Or was it 1 in 100? No. Tears of despair rolled down the determined faces of these mountain men. They watched their motherland, the Stromgarde kingdom, sink into darkness and burn in flames. Their loved ones and compatriots cried and struggled in pain. For a moment, almost everyone in Riptide Castle felt that everything was destroyed, whether it was hope or the road ahead. Riptide Castle was destroyed. This was the second capital to be destroyed since the establishment of the Alliance. It was also the third capital of the 7 human kingdoms to fall. This news spread throughout the entire Alliance within a day. The people of almost every surviving country trembled in fear. Among the remaining countries, only the Dalajan and Silvery Moon had the strongest magical defense. Perhaps they could withstand the destructive attacks of the giant dragons. But the rest were in doubt. Not to mention small countries like Kurtiras and Gilnis. Even Lordaeron couldn't guarantee that they would be able to withstand it. For a moment, the urgency to save the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza reached an unprecedented peak. Every big shot of the Alliance was waiting for the results of Lordaeron's special forces. The results made all the big shots of the Alliance fearful. 48 human corpses were impaled by huge wooden stakes on the empty space outside the wall of Saladin. Looking at these human corpses wearing epic leather armor, most of the guards on the wall were at a loss. Only King Tarina's Menethil was so angry that he plucked out a few tufts of his beard. Lordaeron's surprise attack had failed. It was a complete and utter failure. The high-level bandits that Tarina's had sent were all killed. Not a single one managed to come back to report back to him. This was the most severe slap to Lordaeron's face. For a moment, Duque's act of saving himself and the Red Dragon Queen had attracted the attention of all the big shots of the Alliance. An uneasy feeling enveloped the Kirin Tor Council of 6. In the conference hall in the air, there were no walls. Large amounts of light and dark clouds surrounded these high-level mages, flowing and changing constantly. Looking up, it seemed that even time had become faster. Only the dark gray marble floor, which was inlaid with diamond-shaped runes that symbolized the 4 major elements, gave this scene some semblance of reality. At this moment, the fiercest debate broke out in the conference hall. These usually elegant and scholarly counselors were now even more rowdy than aunties in a wet market. I have no objections to supporting Duke Marcus. I have to admit that he's a great guy who can create miracles. But why did he name Ronan? You're tuning in to the Lime's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.